A boy wakes up in the woods without knowing who or where he is. Listen to how he strives to live and gain a purpose amidst the never-ending chaos in the supernatural community of Beacon Hills. The MC is a vampire, or at least a representation of one of the main types portrayed in media. His vampirism blends elements from Twilight and the Vampire Diaries, as he neither burns in the sun nor glows. Romance? Absolutely. The primary love interest is Malia. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If a Vampire Was in Teen Wolf? Born in Blood. Part 1. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's get into it. Rarg, groaning incomprehensible sounds, he fell to his knees while staring vacantly at the trees. Trying to push himself forward in hopes of reaching the singing tree, but try as he may, he couldn't exert as small a force to tilt his head in its direction. With every struggle, the sounds grew dimmer until the forest was bathed in a downpour of silence, total silence. A silence so heavy that even the insects sang in its muted melody, leaving only the beating of a heart to echo through the forest as the owner fell into slumber. Hours later, under the call of morning birds, a person could be seen walking absent-mindedly, without a sense of direction, seemingly asleep. The moment he got to the edge of the forest, where traces of civilization could be seen, he woke up. Taking a look at his surroundings and also at his naked form, he couldn't help but say the first thing that came to his mind. Arg. Whatever that was in any language. The moment a dawn or realization kicked in, he panicked at his situation. Something that could be called a superstitious occurrence. Try as hard as he may, he couldn't calm himself down. He tried to remember what happened to him before he woke up, and he could only see flashes of images that somehow seemed familiar and also alien. The moment he tried to force himself to remember more, he was assaulted by a severe headache. No, not headache, but pain. Pain so gross that his entire body felt it. It was so monumental that even after minutes, his body still shook just from the memory of it as he lay sprawled on the ground. Minutes later, he picked himself from the ground since the pain had subsided, and he started walking to where the plants and trees were fewer, and he found what looked like a frequently used path. Taking a last look at his naked visage, he stilled his heart and walked to the direction where he could hear cars moving. Walking slowly, he tried his best not to think about anything as the fear of pain gripped his heart. If possible, he wouldn't want to feel like that ever again, but the more he tried not to think about it, the more his mind wandered towards that direction. He tried hard not to push his thoughts more than the surface of his memories, as he felt the mind-boggling pain stir up every time he did. Flashes. Images. None complete, he tried to view the next motion of these images, but every time he did, he felt a prickling pain assault his mind. Since he couldn't do anything with these images, he tried remembering something more instinctual, like his name, but came up blank. His home? Nothing. His family? Still nothing. How old was he? Unlike his memories of images, he couldn't feel anything pointing to who he was. While he did feel something like a block preventing him from remembering more from the images, nothing came up when trying to remember anything about himself. Getting increasingly frustrated at his lack of remembrance, he didn't know how to feel. On one hand, he was angry. At what? Not even he knew. On another, he didn't know how he felt. Slightly miffed at his situation, depressed at his lack of identity, were some of the things he felt as they slowly coagulated in anger. Shaking his head as he tried to vent his emotions were not enough. Seeking a better way of release as he felt something building up in his lungs, he let himself to his instincts as he, horn barely getting to himself as he jumped back to avoid the truck that almost rammed into him due to him losing himself in his thoughts. "Get the hell out the way, kid," yelled the truck driver as he stopped to do a double take of the naked kid coming out the woods looking like he was just raised from the dead with pale white and sunken skin. Stopping further ahead, he pulled on reverse and drove back to the kid who stood rooted in the same spot looking like he just saw a ghost, which was kinda obvious considering he was still in shock since a truck almost ran him by. Stepping down from the truck, The driver looked at the naked kid a second time, and he couldn't help but curse at what kind of psycho would strip a kid naked and starve him then throw him into a forest in the middle of nowhere. "I kid. Got somewhere to go." The zombie kid just looked at him as if he was seeing an alien or shaman. "You know what? Just climb on and I'll give you a ride to the nearest town 2 miles out," the driver said while clicking his tongue and muttering something about mad freaks. He gestured to the boy who was looking at him waringly. "Well, come on now. We gotta get you clothed up and fed," he said as he nudged the boy and lifted him up to the seat. Quickly turning around, he got into the truck and rummaged through to find a blanket or something to wrap around the kid since it was freezing out and the boy probably had been there all night judging from how white his skin was. Possibly hypothermia, goddamn. Finding a worn-out cloth, he wrapped it around the kid and took off his jacket and covered the boy while he slid up the windows preventing any of the chilling air from entering the truck. Confirming the makeshift shelter he managed to procure for the boy, he hit the gas, towing the speed limit, seemingly rushing to the nearest county 2 miles away. While driving, he searched through his pigeonhole for a half-eaten sausage roll and a bottle of water and passed it to the kid who had his eyes glued to it. "Figures. Slow down on the chomp, tiger. It ain't going nowhere," he asserted to the kid who just started wolfing it down as if he'd never been fed for a week. "So you got a name, kid?" he asked the boy who stopped eating and stared at him, opening and closing his mouth but getting no words across. "Can't speak." Followed another inquiry, which was met with silence. "What about parents? Someone to call?" This one was, however, followed by a shake of head. "Shit. Okay then, how about a name or where you from, huh? You gotta help me out here, kid." "Well, no matters. Hopefully there's a missing persons report or something when we get to town." No matter what he said, all he got was silence and the not very often shake of head. Blasted freaks. He couldn't help but curse out again when he thought of whichever psycho did this to a little wee behind-the-ears kid. Looking at the kid again, he didn't look all that old, possibly 12 or 13 maybe, because he couldn't actually tell with the scrawny looks and pale skin. The rest of the journey was covered in silence as he focused on the road while taking glances at his passenger, while said passenger just kept looking forward, not saying anything that could help his situation a bit. Driving for a little over 5 minutes, he passed a sign at the side of the road, "Welcome to Beacon Hills County." "Well, kid, we almost there, so just hang on and hopefully someone out there is probably looking for you." Driving into the county, the driver made a beeline for the Beacon Hills Sheriff County, since that was the only place he figured the kid could get help for whatever he had going on. It took less than 5 minutes to reach the Sheriff County, which was a 2-story building with a few police cars parked at the front, and some cops walking around, probably going on patrol. The driver alighted the truck and went around to help the kid down, and rightfully garnered looks from the passing cops. Not paying much attention to the stares, he went into the station and went straight to the front desk. "Can I speak to the sheriff, please? Got someone a little disturbing," was all he said as he and the desk lady shared a look before straining their eyes to the boy holding his hands. Noah Stalinsky was a very busy man who took his job seriously, even though most times things always seemed relatively normal, as nothing much could go on in a little town like this. But the thing was, the most times where something out of the blue happened with no rhyme or reason. Although times like these were few and far in between and were hardly reoccurring through the years he's been on the force, but every time it occurred it was always something that stomped him or wasn't in line with what he would call a natural phenomenon. He could remember what happened all those years ago, especially the event on the day his wife died and the incidents around it, so no matter how he looked at it, the present case gave him the same feeling. While he wasn't a superstitious person, he was someone who trusted his instinct, and that alone was enough for him to proceed with the utmost caution while paying the maximum attention to the most minute of details, because if any of its precedents was anything to learn from, then this would likely be another case on the unsolved pile, which he really hoped wasn't. No matter what, he would try his best on this seemingly unusually normal case. He didn't become a sheriff not doing so. He could really use a bottle of whiskey any time now. Snapping himself from his daze, he refocused his attention on the 13-year-old boy in his office and the 40-ish-year-old truck driver who brought him in. "From the top, if you will, please," he said, addressing the truck driver, without peeling his eyes from the kid. "Name's Giggs. Like I told the front lady, I was coming from the next town over since I was delivering some lumber to Old Will's. Then 2 miles out, I almost ran into the kid coming straight out of Beacon County Natural Preserve. Sucker stood like a deer caught on Christmas Eve, all frozen and scrawny looking. Lord ha' mercy on the fella. He's been mute since I picked him up. God, I swear some people are just sick in the head. Couldn't even pity a kid in whatever messed up shit they've been doing." Hearing this, Noah couldn't help but furrowed his brows. It looked like it was more serious than he thought. Looking at the boy who seemed out of it, he felt anger at this. While there was no outward sign of abuse on his face or posture, that didn't mean the boy didn't go through something revolting. Physical torture, while the most prominent of abuse, wasn't the only one. Based on the lost look on the boy, he'd reckon emotional abuse, neglect and abandonment, or kidnapping. First of all, he had to check the kid's mental health. Hopefully he was holding up. Then he had to send someone to run by Gig's alibi both in and out of town. "Hey there, son. Think you can tell me your name?" He lightheartedly asked the kid, who looked like he was going to answer as he scrunched his brows in contemplation. He waited for a few moments before the kid looked up and shook his head. He immediately frowned at the sight of that. Amnesia. If that was the case, this was probably more serious than he thought. While he's dealt with a few amnesiac cases during his years, he could count them on one hand and still have spare fingers. Different things could cause amnesia. A jolt to the brain with enough blunt force to not only cause physical damage, but also disrupt the nerve endings of the hippocampus, thereby keeping the episodic memories locked up without being able to access it. Recovering from something like this is quite easy. A jolt to the brain, while applying blunt force, is not advisable as it can further damage the brain. It does sometimes work, or trying to jolt back those memories either by reliving past scenarios or staying in a tranquil environment, which makes accessing the locked memories easier. If it was this, then perhaps with time, the kid could remember. But try as he may, he couldn't see any signs of physical abuse anywhere on the boy's head, which brings it to the worst part. Amnesia stimulated by trauma. Now this where shit dodges the fan and books a premium suite on the ceiling. Curing this type of amnesia requires not only time and extensive care but a subconscious acceptance of said trauma, while not only requiring the consciousness of the brain to render the aforesaid trauma less traumatizing, but also keeping the conscious mind tranquil. In other words, shit falls off the ceiling and hits the fan. Putting a halt to his thoughts, he probed again. "Okay, son, take it easy and try to remember your name." Slow breaths, son. Slow breaths. Once again he was met with a shaking head. Now this was troubling. Forgetting something as instinctual as a name sometimes speaks volume on how deep-rooted his amnesia was. He also checked for any signs of discomfort, but found nothing expressible, which more than likely means any trauma he might be suffering from was from an external source. Venturing deeper, he tested, "What about where you are from? Remember deep breaths." Hearing the soft inhales of the boy, he observed his expression. Other than a few twitches of the brows which could be interpreted broadly, nothing else except the shaking head. "What about your parents? Can you remember them?" Once again, a few twitches and nothing, but he could see the small beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Just a little more. He threw a deeper ball with the next question. "What about your home? Do you remember where you're from?" Instead of the occasional twitch and maybe a shake of head, he got a sharp grunt which increased to shriek of pain. He immediately rushed the kid in a warm hug to provide any sense of security he could while stroking his head. "It's okay, son, it's okay." "Whoa. Must have been shit where he came from," solaced Giggs with a sad look on his face. "Yeah, figures. I'll put out an APB on the kid for a 10-mile radius all the way to the borders. Hopefully we get a click, but I'm not too optimistic about that." "Huh? Why?" "Because we don't know how long he's been missing or which state he's from. If it was recently, then I think it's still in the works, but if it was from a while back, at least a week, or if he was from around the neighboring towns and cities, then I would have had word on a missing kid, but no one's put up a call yet." Giggs interjected. "Yes, but before then we need to run a test on him first. I doubt hypothermia and malnutrition are the only things he suffered from. We still need to do a brain scan to know how worse his amnesia is." "I hear ya. You'll think that peeps still have at least the decency to spare a child, but they just make it a lot harder for them lil kids. Don't know what we turning the world to." "Well, Sheriff, thanks for the kid, but I think I'll get out of your hair for now. Still need to tow them lumber." Noah shook hands with Giggs as he escorted Giggs out of the office with the little boy at his side. He took the little boy's hand and went to the front desk before he called out to the policewoman stationed there. "Hey Simone, I need you to check if there's a bolo for anyone with a description that matches this kid for a 10-mile radius." Turning to leave, he paused at the door and continued. "When you're done, take him to the hospital to get him checked up for any signs of illness or diseases he might have gotten from exposure, also for hypothermia and amnesia." Saying that, he turned to the kid who was quietly looking around and said, "Son, do you think you can wait here with her so she can get you checked up?" He asked as he didn't know if the kid would be okay with meeting too many new people within a short span of time in order not to get him riled up. But to his relief, the boy simply nodded his head in affirmation. Looking over the boy once more for any signs of discomfort or agitation, he nodded at both Simone and the kid before going back into his office to go through any recent kidnapping and missing persons reports while also making some calls. Today was going to be a long day, and he knew it. He just couldn't wait to get home and drink away his frustrations, and maybe listen to his son's ramblings. He didn't know how, but he could understand these people. He didn't really understand what they were saying, but he replied in the most primitive way he could. What did his answer mean? What did they ask? He didn't know. He didn't know, but he could understand. He worked on instinct, replied with what came first to his mind. While he didn't fully understand what language they spoke, he knew what they meant. His name. His parents. Where he came from. He tried to know more, to understand more, but he just couldn't. So like every primal beast of instinct, he left himself to nature. Since his first memories came in flashes, maybe in time he would see the images and then fully remember who he was. He looked just in time for him to see a syringe pierce his skin and draw his blood. He didn't know why, but none of this made him panic. He was more panicked in the truck than he was in the presence of these strangers. Doctors. That lone thought gave him the assurance he needed. He didn't understand what the term doctors meant, but it was there. The assurance that these doctors wouldn't hurt him. It was the same way he felt in station. He hoped he would remember soon. While he soliloquized inwardly to himself, far into the hospital, in a dimly lit room, sat a man on a wheelchair, with burned scars marring half his face. He sat there with a lifeless look in his eyes. Perhaps the only indicator that he was alive was his slow beating heart. Right at that moment his heartbeat sped up and light returned to his dead eyes for just a moment. His eyes shone, against all things natural, an azure blue that was most illuminating inside the dark room. After some time, it went back to its normal blue eyes as it once again dimmed, relating to its lack of consciousness. There he sat once more, no different from a dead man except for his beating heart. All his thoughts unknown to no one. While with the boy, all he did was sit and listen to what the doctors were saying, trying to at least understand the meaning of the words they were speaking. After he was done with his test, the female cop took him back to the precinct, straight to the sheriff's office, where she gave him the report that apart from starvation and relative amnesia, there was nothing wrong with him. This could either be seen as good or seen as bad depending on circumstances. Hopefully he was kidnapped and then abandoned in a forest, which would mean that he had at least a family somewhere looking for him. Simone, I need you to tell Paul and Tallman to take some of the boys and search the woods around Beacon County Preserve with a 5 kilometers radius. If he was kidnapped and ran away, or was abandoned, they would have had to take him inside the forest to throw him away. Noah ordered. He then continued, we need anything we can find. Trail marks, footprints, anything. He then let out a sigh. How in the hell were they going to get a trail leading to God knows where in the middle of a forest? They would have more luck finding a print of Bigfoot than finding a supposed kidnapper's trail. If he truly was kidnapped, then this case would be solved pretty quickly once they put out word or heard a reply from their neighbors. But if he was just abandoned, then that in itself was just damning the case even further. Were there any clicks on the blood scan? Noah asked, since if by any chance the kid was from Beacon Hills, then he might have had a blood test through the years, and since the hospital kept records, then he would be able to identify whose kid this was. Negative, sir, replied Simone, who then turned to leave in order to fulfill the sheriff's command. Seeing her leave, he once again heaved a sigh. I really need a bottle right about now. Huff huff. He didn't know how much time had passed, as the only thing he knew was day and night, and not the number of hours they embodied. He ignored the shouts from the angry drivers. Not that he knew why they were shouting when all he did was cross the road like every other person before him. He was at ease in the night, something he had found out recently, and he also was highly afraid of it, or rather it didn't appeal to him like everything else. It was something primal, almost instinctual, but his danger sense was so low that he couldn't tell the difference until it was very apparent to him. The moment he found himself in the forest, his rising heartbeat calmed down, the meaning of this action eluding him. He felt more safe here than he felt at Simone's house. He felt more free. He didn't know how long he had wandered, but it must have been very long as he started feeling pangs in his stomach. It got so bad that his pace became very slow and he started clutching his stomach. HRRNNG. Rarg. He tried to stop it by expressing himself, but it did nothing except bringing him down to his knees as more pain wrecked his body. Pain. Stop. Hunger. He didn't know the relationship between the three, but he knew that he had to make everything that was currently happening to him stop. He rolled and rolled, beat his stomach with his fists and cried out at the loudest he could, but all it did was make the pain more fierce. He tried pushing himself forward one step at a time, hoping that where he didn't know he was going would be able to stop the pain. Only being able to focus on the pain he was feeling, his legs got caught in some vines and feeling the last bit of strength he had leaving his body, he fell down the slope path he was walking on and started tumbling down. All he could do was unintelligibly cry out in pain as his little body hit the trees and stones on his descending fall. Splash. And landed on a body of water. Feeling the state of something familiar, he reflexively swallowed and a tiny bit of his pains were assuaged. Understanding that he could finally fight the pain, he started gulping large amounts of water and felt the pain greatly subside until he started choking on it. After being greatly comforted with his fill, he stood up from the stream he had fallen in and continued his walk. Though he felt light aches in his stomach, it wasn't anything he couldn't disregard. He stopped and looked up to the source of the light that was illuminating his way and found the white circle that floated above the clouds. He was so entranced with it that he didn't immediately notice when something started crawling his way. Grrrrl, he slowly turned around, not at all aware of the danger he was in, and saw the little animal in front of him with luminescent blue eyes. Not knowing what it was, and also due to his curiosity, he started making his way towards the furry animal, which resulted in a more intense growl. He stood in front of the animal and wholeheartedly ignored its hunched position and low growls and reached out his hands. The animal, only an instinct away from chomping on the incoming hand, felt all its hair stand on its tail as the boy's hand made contact with its head. The boy, seemingly not knowing the dangers he'd escaped, started rubbing the little animal's head. It was something different from all what he had seen. The thing before him was very different from the other people he had seen, as it was the first sighting of an animal he'd experienced ever since he woke up. His hand ran through the hair on instincts alone for a while before he abruptly stopped. The hunger. It was coming back. He looked around in a bid to find the flowing water he had seen before, but he couldn't. The animal, seeing the boy suddenly becoming restless and looking around aimlessly, suddenly separated itself from the boy and brought up its guard. Not knowing the state of the furry animal he was petting a few moments ago, the boy continued looking around before restarting his walk, since he already knew that he couldn't afford to stay in one place when that pain came. He left the animal alone and continued his walk into the forest in search of nothing he knew. The animal, seeing as the child was finally gone, started following the trails he left. And so the two continued the night like that, with the boy looking for sustenance while the animal followed behind. It was a miracle he had managed to survive for the past few days, not just due to the luck he had with food, but also shelter. He had toured most the night on that day looking for water, but since he couldn't find another stream of water, having lost his way, he had settled for eating grass. Happy that it had placated his hunger for as little as it did. Luckily for him, he had found another water flow and drank from it, but was quite reluctant to leave his fountain, since he had come to know the importance of the flowing clear liquid. He also found some sweet things to eat by the riverbank among the grass he had picked, so he was very... He didn't know what he felt, but he had felt good at that moment. He had been beside himself before the memory of the animal came back to him, which caused him to make a frantic turn in order to find it, only to calm down when he saw it by the trees in the distance. Not knowing how to call it, or even if he wanted to call it, the two, boy and animal, continued staring at each other for an indefinite amount of time before the animal started walking forward on its own accord towards the boy. Seeing his company finally taking the decision to come closer, the boy calmed down and sat by the riverbank until it joined him, both staring at the now partial moon while listening to the sound of the running water. They continued like that until one of them got bored and signaled to the other to follow, which they did. It was weird if someone else had seen this, but their communication was all centered on the belief that the other could understand what they were trying to say without having to speak a word. The boy continued on following his newly found companion, since even he wasn't sure where his body needed to go at this point, so he was glad to be able to grasp onto something that could dictate his movement. He followed the little animal until she brought him to a cave, somewhere that, although not warm enough, was still better than having to sleep outside under the night sky, no matter how much he would have loved to try something like that. He would have laughed if he knew how to, or if he knew what it was, so he didn't and took everything happening to him as natural. Even the animal that was supposed to have ripped him to shreds the moment he laid a finger on its body and still invited it to its cove was a bit stumped, but it didn't do anything. Not even when the boy grabbed it around its neck and drew it close to him in a bid for warmth. And so the first night of the boy and its animal companion passed. He was quick to learn the importance of food from his companion, as a few hunger pangs were enough for him to grow accustomed to and dislike the experience while also knowing how to remedy it. The only problem he had was with his companion. Sure, they understood each other in some levels, but communication was still key to cooperation. Most of the time, they would spend minutes to an hour just looking at each other, most likely wondering when the other was going to figure out what they wanted until his companion would growl and walk away, only coming back later with blood stains around its mouth. Even though their communication was bad, it didn't stop the boy from knowing when he had to sustain himself and tracing his way back to the riverbank for some sweetened meal. Unfortunately, he was soon to realize that not all sweet things were good, especially when taken over a sustained period of time. It was 3 days before the ache came, bringing with it a torrential wave of pain that assaulted the boy until he woke up in the middle of the night. His companion had been quite stressed, whining, growling and prowling around as he turned around in discomfort while clutching his sides. It was only the licks it gave and the hugs he sought that had managed to soothe him until the morning, but that night had remained a hard one for the duo who couldn't say a word to each other. The next morning, his animal friend was found bringing in little dead animals with its bloodied mouth and dropping it before the boy while it waited for him to wake up. Seeing as the boy was not waking up, it went out again to hunt for more food, the one it liked anyway, and brought them back before proceeding to lick the boy's face as it laid beside him. Whether it was the stench of blood or the wet tongue that continuously lapped his face, the boy had no other choice than to stir awake in the face of the two assaults. Seeing as its new friend was awake, it nuzzled him a few times before standing up and bringing him the dues of the successful hunt it had carried out early in the morn and laid it in front of him before prodding him to partake. Getting the clue immediately, and also because he was famished and not wanting to ever feel the pain of hunger, he crawled over and held one before taking a bite out of the dead animal. Glurg! He immediately spat it out, which did not seem to amuse his concerned companion, if the growl it gave was any indication. Hearing his friend's growl, he scrunched his face and took another strong bite out of the meat, but his entire body shook in disgust, and he was forced to spit it out again. Bad. This was the strongest impression he had ever gotten from anything, and it was basically telling him that what he was doing wasn't good. Alas, the concept still eluded him, so the only thing he felt was the sour taste and the slight shiver he got every time he took a bite. He shrunk back in fear, a rather instinctual and primal reaction when something outside of your scope of expectations happens, as his companion started letting out heavy growls and barking. He looked at the meal in front of him and picked another one, hoping it would taste different from the second one, but all his hopes were dashed. This time, however, the same bite that he could take he kept in his mouth and looked at his furry companion who had stopped growling and had both of its eyes on him, wondering what he would do next. Seeing as he had its full attention, he closed his eyes and swallowed the tiny piece of meat into his stomach, and if he could read his companion, he would have seen contentment flashing through its eyes, only for it to be dashed as he spat it out. The next thing he felt was his arm being bitten quite harshly, which resulted in a cry of pain escaping his mouth. Arg! On that same day, the duo had their first fight with the furry companion winning, while the boy had bite marks and bruises all over his body. It would forever be considered a wonder how they had managed to survive, the boy in particular, over the days that had rolled by. Quite numerous in fact, but none cared about it as they couldn't count. Though quite comical in nature, the boy and animal had come to a conclusion after their first debacle in which they silently agreed that none would get food for the other, since they couldn't eat what the other ate. The boy had stayed with his companion for a few days, but decided to continue walking to who knows where, which apparently didn't sit well with the furry roomie. It held the boy with its teeth by the hem of his shorts and dragged him back despite the pitiful fights the boy tried to put on. There were also quite a few bite marks all over his body, and the only reason such a thing wasn't visible on its body was that the boy's teeth wasn't as strong as its own, because the boy had for sure paid back every bite with one of his own. Seeing as none would compromise, the animal let go of the boy and went to its abode, not intent on dragging back the unwilling boy no longer. The boy on his own had ventured deeper into the woods, not caring about anything, as the only thing that had registered into his newly formed danger sense were the angry growls of his companion. He would start his walk by night, aware of the fact that he was quite weak and mostly sleepy when the shining ball was up above the blue sky. It had also taken him a few days to realize that he was not alone in his walk. Why? Because his furry companion would trail him at night for some time before disappearing altogether. Without any care for how far he'd walked and finally forgetting the reason why he even started the impromptu journey in the first place, he crashed against the familiar stump of a tree and slept. A woman was seen walking through a forest with a cloak over her body under the dark sky of the night. She had felt it even though she had been away from the town. It felt like something was drawing her here, a prelude of something that was to come. She was as recluse as a monk, heavily due to the fact that she practiced the same, and in some other vein similar belief as the old masters. The town was still quiet, so maybe none of them had felt the call, or they were just too far away to realize the pull that was subconsciously pricking at the deepest recesses of their mind. Whatever it was, all she wanted to do was check what it was that made the tree cry out, and then she would be gone. She was not needed, and she was also too old to participate in whatever storm was brewing. As she contemplated the changes whatever was coming would bring, she felt something entering the scope of her senses and keeping track of her. Turning around, all that could be seen beneath the cloak was a pair of scarlet-red eyes that seemed to terrify whatever was lurking in the shadows, but the moment the eyes fell on the intruder, it just as quickly lost its ethereal glow. It was an animal, a coyote in fact, which was supposed to be really rare among these parts. Like a few animals she's seen in her long and old life, this one emitted an aura that was unlike other natural animals. "No need to scamper and lurk behind, I know where you are," she said to the darkness, and waited for a few seconds before the frenzied growl of an animal could be heard. The coyote walked, a slow step after another, until its entire body was illuminated by the moonlight which contrasted beautifully with its bright blue eyes. "Well then, I'll try not to intrude on your practices." She nodded at the coyote, not at all bothered by the clearly not normal creature, and continued on her way even as it trailed behind. It continued like that until the woman stopped in front of a clearing where a giant stump laid cleanly cut, and at its foot was a boy. Before she could take a step further, the coyote who had placated itself by trailing behind her rushed forward and stood in front of the boy defensively while growling at the woman not to come near. The woman was quite surprised when she saw this, but the actions of the coyote didn't impede her steps. Seeing the intruder not heeding its words, it snarled in anger and pounced on her, faster than any normal animal could react to, only for its snout to be held tightly before she threw it away. It roared in anger, clearly not a fan of being thrown aside, and proceeded to rush at her once more only to have its steps falter as it once more came across the haunting red eyes of the cloaked figure. It shook its head in a bid to shake away the creeping fear it felt while roaring out its hate on the figure, but the figure didn't flinch the slightest in fright and continued to stare at it. It had wanted to take another step towards its enemy, but its legs went weak and its belly touched the ground in submission as it heard the roar of the red one. The roar of a king. Most predators roar. They do so in the case when they confront something that opposes them, but there is one known consensus of a roar that every animal of the jungle knows. The roar of an alpha. A call to submission. One sounded by the one who ruled above others, and at its call, all those under it were bound to submit, and submit it did. "You are rabid. An unbefitting state of any such as us. I am not here to harm the boy." She spoke to the quivering coyote who lay sprawled on the ground in fear. It is a miracle that something like this can even exist. An unfettered supernatural and a human boy. I would have thought you would have ripped him to shreds at the very first moment you met. But no. You'll even go as far as to protect him from something you have no hope of facing, even now. She said and stopped where she stood, a few meters from the boy, and watched as the coyote dragged itself on the ground to place itself between her and the boy. A very commendable act, and one so pure that it could never be attributed to something that was next to an animal of the wild. The coyote stood in front of its charge, head down in fear but with a growl in its breath, doing its pitiful best to keep the boy safe from what it considered a threat. It wanted to run, it wanted to flee with the fastest haste it could muster, but at the end of it all, it wanted to protect. It wanted to have something to hold on to, even if it faced a sure death at the alpha's hands. It let out a pitiful whine as it felt the alpha coming closer. It seemed as if the force on ground suddenly became thicker as it found it hard to continue standing in its pitiful form as the beast of all beasts took another step forward. It had been ready to risk it all for a lunge at the neck the moment the alpha came within its striking zone, but all those thoughts were washed away as soon as her hand met its head. "I'm sorry, little one. I guess even the supernatural world still can't escape the vast unfairness this world has to offer. I'll protect the boy if that's what you wish," she said before withdrawing her hand and going for the boy, whose danger sense was completely non-existent that he didn't even stir awake due to the noise and growls they were making, and picked him up. She started going her way but had to stop when she looked back and saw the lifeless blue eyes of the coyote. The beautiful sky blue of an omega was dimming, leaving it with the darkened eyes of any typical animal. It was only then she understood why it stood its ground against her to protect the boy. A/N, for clarification, blue eyes don't symbolize an omega. It symbolizes a beta who has gone through a severe traumatic experience that scarred them, or a beta that has taken an innocent life. Omegas are lone wolves, a status that is either by choice, member of a fallen pack, or one kicked out. The boy was its anchor. And she almost took that away. Truly, we are the most unfortunate. The coyote looked at the ground, unable to bring its head up and check if it had truly protected the boy because it knew, not instinctually but quite possibly, that it had failed. He was its to take care of, but its strength failed. Follow me. Wallowing in self-pity won't help your current state. It heard the voice of the alpha and was prompted to look up and find the boy cradled in one arm while the other beckoned in it to follow. Having nothing to do, and also besides itself with the possibility of losing its charge, it followed behind the alpha to a destination unknown. Noah Stalinsky was hit with a huge dose of depression after his recent failure in securing back the child that he had to drink more than a few pint of bottles until Styles took it away from his drunken hands. Simone had even opted to retire on her own since they couldn't find the child after the first few weeks of that it was taking a huge toll on the young woman's psyche. Noah could understand where she was coming from, so there was nothing he could do to convince her when she handed him her resignation letter. They had tried their best in locating the child, even going deep into the preserve, but they couldn't find its trail, almost seeming as if they were walking in circles. The worst part of this whole messed up scenario was that no one, not even a single person, had reached out in lieu of the boy. Even all the way to the borders, none of his contacts had received a call claiming to know who the boy was. It was as if he was actually abandoned by his parents, or whatever mistake of a parent they could be, and maybe he was also re-kidnapped by them. There were a lot of scenarios running around his head, with one of it being, why the amnesia? It was so intense than any other amnesiac case he'd seen, one so deep that he couldn't even remember his own name. Another worrying part was that the boy didn't speak a single word for the whole duration he was with them. Maybe he had lost his ability to express himself in words due to trauma? Whatever it was, there was one thing he knew would never change. He had failed again, and to an innocent child no less. Sometimes he would wonder what if something like that happened to his own son and someone else were to fail him. It wasn't the thought of the failure that scared him the most, but what Styles would have to go through in the event of the failure, and that fear shook him to the bone every time he thought of it, which inversely increased his depression, as he had let the same thing happen to the boy. And that was a thought that no alcohol could erase, only time could. He had kept the file in the unsolved pile, but he knew that unless a miracle happened, not one of those piles would ever be solved, only forgotten. It was a pile of his failures, and they were getting larger by the year. I need another drink. Styles should be at Scott's place and spending the night there, so there should be no problem in taking a small sip. She'd never seen anything like this in all of her long life, and even when counting the things she's experienced, this one ranked among the top. The boy was as blank as a sheet could get, one even devoid of the appropriate emotions a child like him should have. Fear, hate, like excitement, trust, defiance. None were present, or were in less than satisfactory quantity, only showing the barest amount when he was in a tussle with her. The events that played during her acquisition of him were still fresh in her mind after all. As far as her senses could tell, he was definitely human, a stark contrast when compared to what was normally considered of a human male child. She had briefly wondered what would happen if he were to be given the bite, but shook her head at that thought. She didn't know why, but something drew her to the boy. Not just her, but any supernatural with acute senses would have been drawn to that location. Despite being a variation of what a human should be, because that was exactly what the boy was, he had been drawn to the Nemeton, and she had been drawn to that connection because she was the closest to that vicinity. If any other alpha were to be in her place, then she was sure that the boy would have been turned at that instant, because no alpha, even the most righteous, would throw away something that could be the ideal representation of them. The boy was a canvas to any alpha to be painted on, including her. Someone with such lacking sense of self, she wondered what his reflection would be. Would it be an ideal of herself, or would it be the amalgamation made from what he identifies with? Different from what others might be led to think, an alpha's bite is not always guaranteed to produce a successor of the same descent. The bite was a way, so to say, to see past the preconception and stare at the true reflection of oneself. Hang around a werewolf too much and the probability of you being one when you receive the bite is astronomically high, but being true to yourself to the core is a way to see past the preconceived notion of what the alpha thinks of you. Now what if her, an alpha, were to bite someone who not only knew what others were, but also lacked a sense of self, that the most he could do was mirror back a reflection of whatever stirs him? Even she as an alpha was driven by that prospect. He had no name, no memories, no vibrant emotion to show off, and no concrete impression of anything. She watched as the little girl still trapped in her coyote form wrapped itself around the boy in a bid to protect him from any danger. It warmed her heart that even after whatever trial she must have faced or she had gone through, She still retained a part of her humanity that enabled her to anchor onto the purest soul she could find. She had already made the decision to change the girl back to her human form the moment she told her to follow her. It would be better all the more if she taught her to let go of her nightmares and achieve the peace she needed on her own. Looking at the way the two of them hugged each other subconsciously as a pillar of support, she wondered what type of life they would lead. What sort of experiences life had laid in front of them that made them find each other. All she instinctively knew was that it would one day take them back to Beacon Hills. Whether that would be a good or bad thing was something she had no idea of. His eyes fluttered open, and the first thing that graced his sights were the all-too-now familiar ash-brown fur of his animal friend. He had gotten the memo from the older woman that it was a she, so that was something new he had learned. She laid directly on top of him in a way that made them look like a cross from anyone watching, with her tail wrapped around one of his arms. Trying for a bit and seeing that he couldn't move, he relaxed and just laid there until she decided to wake up or decided it was time she let him go. Thankfully for him, due to his stirring, she woke up and got up from him on her own before proceeding to lick his face, an action that drew no reaction from the boy except staring at her as she did so. It was something he was used to after all, as it was something she'd been doing since the first time they've met. "I see that the both of you are up." He heard the voice of the woman that had brought him away from the forest. He didn't know why, but ever since he had woken up in her presence, he no longer felt the pull like he did before. His animal friend circled around him twice before nudging at his legs a little as he stood up from the bed they slept. They were not the only ones who didn't know what to do, as the same could be said for the woman. She had taken him into her hands in the spur of the moment without any concrete plan on what she wanted to do with him, but it wasn't something that would stomp her since she's been taking care of children throughout her long life. She did have an inkling as to what to do with the girl who turned out to be a natural coyote. Talk about rarity. And speaking of children, you children can come in now. At her words, the door to the room opened and a group of people came in. They all stood behind their alpha awkwardly as the boy just stared ahead at them while the coyote growled in a lone voice threateningly until Satomi began with the introduction. "These are my family. My pack. I hope in time you will learn about them and come to see them as your own family, your own brothers and sisters." She looked at the boy, and the way his eyes glided through everyone let her know that he at least had understood what she was trying to convey. The only problem lied with the little coyote. While it was very easy for her to force the unruly girl into submission, the act of doing such a thing was against her beliefs. Satomi-san, are you sure about this? He's human, right? Or do you plan to turn him?" One of her older pack members asked. It was a point that had occurred early on to the aged members, as they knew that not all the betas in the pack could control their shift and their intense emotions, mostly during a full moon where everything was heightened to a 10. Having a human nearby was akin to dropping blood in an ocean of sharks. It would easily rile up their inner monsters. "I do plan on giving him the bite, but not yet. I feel as if he's not yet ready. When he is, the choice will ultimately belong to him," she said. While it was true that she was tempted to give him the bite and find out what type of supernatural would he be, even as a werewolf there were still a few distinctions that a bite could give. She felt like doing it now would be robbing him of something, a sense of self. "So can he, understand what we are saying, or are we going to start learning sign language?" "Lori." The mouth of the girl who asked the first question was quickly covered by the boy beside her, which quickly drew the attention of all the occupants, including the new arrivals. Satomi let out a small laugh at the antics of her children, but waved of the girl's concern. "The boy can understand, though to what extent is something I have no idea of. The coyote, however, mainly understands intent, so know that when you attempt to speak to her." At her words, the gradually bubbly atmosphere of the room suddenly plummeted. Even though she hadn't said anything about the coyote, everyone understood that something traumatic must have happened to have made her take that form that reduced her to her baser instincts, and the worst part about it was that they've all seen her blue eyes. The sky-blue eyes of someone who's taken a life. But even with that, none of them faulted her, as even though it was clear that she had taken a life, her current state was enough to garner pity from them, not that it helped her in any way. They only have each other, you can clearly see that. I want you to care for them as you care for each other. Their past matters little and shouldn't be the first criteria we judge them with. Hopefully in time they'll open up to us as well. She addressed that to not only the members of her pack, but also the two people she was introducing into it. She then walked towards the two of them, the boy just taking in everything with the most innocent and blank gaze she's ever seen, while the little girl never once stopped regarding her with hostility. She knelt down in front of the duo, the coyote being the only one who reacted, and her brown eyes turned blood red. The coyote seemed to shrink back at the front of her gaze, and for the first time since she's met them, the boy reacted violently. Grrrrrrll. He outright growled at her, just like he had seen the coyote do so many times. He didn't know why she growled, but he understood that it must be something that was used to steer threats away. This time he was the one who was at the front of his companion, which was different than what it used to be. Instinctually, the eyes of all her pack members glowed yellow with very few glowing iridescent blue, and they all glared at the duo, one shivering behind while the other stood at the forefront, not displaying even the tiniest bit of fear. He knew not fear after all. Roar. The entire room vibrated, but the boy didn't move a step back, but instead used one hand to hold the spasmodic and shivering form of his longtime companion, while also glaring at Satomi with the first true emotion he's ever shown. Hate. Murderous hate, and a pure one at that. He even made even the most vile of emotions seem innocent. Oh, how she truly wanted to give him the bite right now, but she held in. He needed to grow first. Whimper, the boy's focus immediately changed as he felt that the soothing fur of who he was holding immediately changed to that of the smooth skin of a girl. And for the second time that day, the boy showed another apparent emotion. Confusion. Genuine confusion that seemed as if it was taking him a hard time to understand. But even at that, he never let go of the girl he held. He turned to look at the woman and found that her eyes no longer looked dangerous, and so were those of the people in the room. It was the definition of what a pack was. All for one, and one for all. If a pack member was ever to be threatened, the rest will grow out their fangs for retaliation, regardless of what the threat represented. Loyal to a fault. Bonds thicker than that of family. A wolf's pack. It has been over a month since the boy and the girl started living with Satomi, and those that were still present in her pack. At first it was quite hard for the family of werewolves to properly communicate with them, and that was due to various reasons. First being that the boy had next to no impression on anything. He had a little understanding of English, so the communication between him and the rest of the pack was okay, and he had recently started to respond back, only a few words, but that was progress in and of itself. Second was the girl, Malia, as they've come to learn. She was quite as reserved as the boy, but she was pretty violent if someone got into her space. Satomi had said that it was due to her still not being used to controlling her emotions, and luckily for her, she was in the best place to learn something like that. Another thing was how glued they were to each other. Everyone could see how she had most likely imprinted on the boy, and the boy had done the same. While he was not supernatural or animalistic in any way, it was still clear that they both had a high level of dependence on each other. It was a surreal experience for the pack to see a human learning how to be a human from a pack of wolves. So far, all what he'd learned before meeting them could be attributed to mainly instinctual responses like knowing that fire burns because you touched it. The boy was just too blank. They couldn't even call him innocent because he wasn't. He just didn't know what bad actions were. Arg. That's not it, Tristan. Brett almost felt like pulling off his mutated ears, but unfortunately, the target of his frustrations only looked at him with confusion. Tristan, the name chosen for the boy, as they couldn't just keep addressing him as boy and you. Not surprising for the pack, Malia had been the one who strongly advocated for the name after they had pitched over 12, each of them having their own choice. The reason for Brett's frustration came from the fact that Tristan still thought, even after all these, while that transforming to an animal form was something all of them could do, and by all of them he meant himself too. Brett wasn't the least bit amused by the path his development was straying on as Tristan, for some unexplained reason, thought that Malia of all people was someone to be taken as a role model. The girl was brash, crude, rude, outspoken, no decency for tact, aggressive, and every other thing he could think of that made the girl a problem to deal with. The older members of the pack could easily understand where the girl was coming from, and could tell that her emotions were rather raw, more so than the normal adolescent teenage wolf. It sometimes made them wonder how the boy could be so natural in her presence, and she his. Most of Tristan's and Malia's time of the day was spent meditating. Satomi's pack was a rather hermit one, as they all kept to themselves, and meditative practices was one of the things they always did, either as a group or in their privacy. Tristan, like always, took the training as something normal, a very good mindset to have, and was quite accomplished at it, even though he didn't know the importance and benefits or the practice, while his other half, Malia, was having quite the hard time at it. She wasn't one for subtlety, and sitting still in a room in silence with legs crossed was a very daunting task for her, even if Tristan was there with her. The level of dependency that was shared between the both of them was too high for it to be healthy, something that even the youngest members of the pack took note of. It was weird to see a human reflecting the action of an animal's imprint. In Tristan's case, that he would growl at anyone who hurt the girl, even during her self-control exercises. Even Satomi was forced to step in at some point to make sure the boy would not be mauled to death by an irritated member of her pack. Out of all of them, the people the duo were closest to was Brett and his sister Lori. Or rather, in Brett's case, they were the two people Malia decided to bare her fangs on, something which irritated the male werewolf to no end. Lori, on the other hand, was quite cool with Malia, being able to talk to the girl without drawing a negative reaction from her, and was also someone who could be called her closest friend, after Tristan that is. The reason she was close to the boy, to the point of it being dangerous, was made clear to everyone after her first full moon as human were Coyote. Satomi had personally seen to that event, as she was the one who brought them in, and also due to the fact that she was the pack's alpha, and something like a first full moon transformation was quite special to any were supernatural. Due to her being trapped in her coyote form for years, Malia had never experienced what it was like to live through her first full moon in her human form, and considering that this would be her first, it was imperative that she at least got the basics down. The other young members, even some of the older ones, had locked themselves inside their room as they prepared to live through the night without even shifting a hair, which left only Satomi and Tristan with Malia. Malia sat cross-legged with her fingers intertwined together, and took in deep breaths as she felt the draw of the moon. She felt her baser instincts being rattled and battering against her barriers. Barriers she had put up to stop her from tearing at anything she found unpleasant. It was flimsy at best, but it was all what she could manage given the 1-month time frame. She took in deep breaths as she felt her entire mind drown in turmoil and the building rage that came with being a were-coyote on a full moon. Listen to my voice, Malia. What you are now is nothing. The pull you feel is nothing. Your mind is nothing. Satomi's voice echoed in her ears, and she couldn't help but be drawn to it. Right now, you are at your most peaceful. Every distraction around and within you is reduced to nothing. Worry about nothing. 3 things cannot long be hidden. The sun, the moon, the truth. Her brows creased as heated rage flowed through every part of her body, slowly devouring her in its fiery embrace. Repeat it. 3 things can and not long be hidden. The sun, the moon, the truth. She stammered out, feeling that she was a few breaths away from losing herself to her instincts. The sun, the moon, the truth. Malia, focus. She heard Satomi's voice, but her emotions muddled any reaction she could express. Her inner mind couldn't even feel what was outside anymore as Red took her vision. She tried finding her anchor, what she could hold on to in her most dire state, and panic gripped her soul when all she felt was void. She was alone, cold. The feeling of tearing through flesh assaulted her senses and made her drown in the sensation. She felt despair. She remembered flashlights and the silhouette of a woman, and the next thing she knew was her vision tumbling over, and then she smelt it. Blood. Fear. Despair. It was like a sumptuous meal spread before her, and before she even knew how it happened, it was all that was in her senses. The world became more vibrant, and the colors more pronounced. She crawled towards the source of the blood, and the next thing she felt was the wind against her body as she ran through the forest, faster than was humanly possible. Until her senses caught the smell of 2 people. Without even thinking, she lunged at the object of her senses and went straight in for the kill. Satomi let out a sigh as she saw the young girl succumb to her animal instincts. Looking at how the girl seemed to have lost her sense of self, she knew she would have to double her efforts and try again on another moon. It looks like I'll have to put her down for the night. She was getting ready to stop the assault when the boy stepped in front of her and obstructed her from Malia. She would have easily stopped him, but her curiosity won her over, and watched as the rabid girl pounced on Tristan and brought down her fangs on him, only for it to be wedged against her mouth. She forced him down to the ground and brought her claws out, ready to mutilate him, which was a nice way to put being dead, but she stopped. Urgh. The boy groaned in pain as her fangs crunched on his bone, staining her mouth and his face with blood. The rabid light in her eyes dimmed as she saw the victim of her outburst and his groan of pain she had inflicted on him. Reluctantly, or maybe in shock, she dislodged her mouth from his hand and took a faltering step back as the implications of what she had done finally set on her. Trist, I so dash her words immediately died down, only for it to erupt in sobs as she felt his pull that forced her to collapse on his legs, only for him to start petting her hair. Shame gripped her hard that even her cries couldn't escape her throat, making her gasp for air, but the boy just continued rubbing her hair soothingly. It was a harmonious scene of a distraught girl crying her eyes out while she held him tight. Her little beacon, one she almost destroyed in a fit of emotions. There were no words of explanation that she could give that would assuage the fact that she had hurt him and consequently almost killed him. Malia. He only spoke that one word, but all what he wanted to say was conveyed. There was no need for plenty of words between them because only they knew what they meant to each other, at least had an inkling of what it was. They were important to each other. That much they knew without anybody needing to tell them or point it out. Trist, I'm sorry. She bawled out again and held him tighter to the point that his bones rattled, but he didn't let out a wince of discomfort. He was her anchor, and her actions had been the equivalent of throwing him away at the turbulent sea without any rope connecting them together. He had more than enough reason to be scared of her, even if he didn't fully know what fear was. The fear of death was the patron to advancement, and yet even in the face of a possibility, he still held her close. I'm sorry. She was but a little girl who had lost her family, killed them even, and had turned into an animal. The only thing she didn't hate or feel guilty about was the boy currently holding her close. Malia. He called her again, and this time drew her up. He didn't know what he was doing, but she'd done this numerous times to him in a bid to cheer him up. He held her in a hug and muzzled her hair with his chin and kept at it until the full moon was over and she fell asleep. He picked her up, not minding the blood he'd lost, and took her to their room, an arrangement that was met because she couldn't sleep without her pillow him, and he liked how warm she was. Bacon. Two teens could be seen arguing at the section of a mall that sold canned livestock produce. The female had mid-length dark brown hair that she let loose at her shoulders and wore a red checkered baggy shirt and ripped jeans, while the object of her fervent argument wore a plain t-shirt and shorts with the shadows of a tattoo creeping out of the short sleeves of his shirt. He had the standard dark hair and brown eyes. Different from the girl, he had a packet of eggs as opposed to the bacon his partner oh so fervently wished for. The two of them had attracted a small crowd of amused shoppers as neither wanted to back down from their choice. Seeing as how her partner was still refusing her simple wish, she huffed and made to grab the bacon, only for her wrist to be tightly held to the point that she was having trouble even twitching it. Eggs. The boy calmly said and directed his sight to the packet of eggs in his hands and nodded his head in assurance. Why eggs, Trist? You know I don't like them. We should go with bacon. She stamped her foot as bore her eyes into that of the teen in hopes of intimidating him to acquiesce to her demands, but he just stared back at her blankly, and if not for the fact that she had known him for a long time, she would have been led to believe that his blank stare was a sarcastic one. They both continued their stare down until she was forced to give up as there was just no way she could win against him and his dead eyes. Too much bacon, Malia. Was all he said as he put down the eggs inside their trolley and pushed it to another section of the mall. What do you mean, too much bacon? How can someone have too much bacon? It's supposed to be the staple food for us considering who and what we are. She groaned and walked behind Tristan while her eyes darted left and right looking for anything that might catch her eye. She naturally caught the eyes of a handful of boys and a few girls, but she didn't pay attention to them as she was more focused on what she wanted Tristan to buy for her to complete whatever meal it was that they wanted to cook. Corn. Tristan paused for a moment in thought before nodding his head at her suggestion and focused back on getting their necessities while she picked whatever she thought was necessary. It was a synergy between them that made it harmonious despite their differences. Ham? No? Well, figured it wouldn't hurt to try. She kept the ham back with a little pouting in her tone, not that he cared in the very least. Even if he wouldn't never say it to anyone, Malia was quite a handful, and sometimes he wondered why it was virtually impossible to find a good reason to hate her. They were that joined at the hip. They continued walking around the mall, looking for anything they personally needed alongside their foodstuffs. Hey, I think we should get more knives. Who knows when we'll need them? She said offhandedly, and Tristan next to her hummed with a nod of his head. Being the proactive one, Malia took it upon herself to browse through the numerous shelves for anything that caught her fancy, which left Tristan just pushing his trolley around. You know we're going clothes shopping next, right? Tristan grunted at the reminder, but his face remained as blank as possible with a little imperceptible twitch here and there. You look dead, you know that, right? I mean, it's not like a new look for you, but would you mind, I don't know, livening yourself up more? I mean, it's shopping. It's supposed to be a fun and refreshing activity. He glared at the outspoken girl who wouldn't hesitate to rip out someone's throat talk about having fun while shopping, not knowing that it was because of her that he was almost fed up with it. Not for the fact that she'd make him carry the bags, because he mostly doesn't, but for the fact that she could be quite tenacious when it came to things she likes. Though Satomi gave them more than enough money to tide the next few months over, Malia wouldn't hesitate to spend it all just for a short she liked, mostly because she knew she could strong-arm the no-nonsense alpha into giving her more. He looked at the watch strapped to his wrist and let out a pitiful wince when he realized it was just 11:34 a.m., which was quite early all things considered. Let's just get this over with. This was the most worded sentence he had spoken throughout the day. Now that's the spirit. Malia patted him on the back and continued on her part of the journey, which was picking up stuff that she thought would benefit them while Tristan would judge of its true worth. That would be $116.19. Paying in cash, they took what they bought in 3 big bags and made their way to a Toyota Prius that was parked among the sea of automobiles in the parking lot. Oh, I forgot. Devon Ford Prep is having a match against Beacon Hills and Lori says we're coming. Malia said as they unloaded their bags inside the boot. Brett will obviously be playing, so it's a win for them. Don't know why she insisted on us watching. Hey losers. An obnoxious shout drew the attention of the two but only made one scowl as they saw who it was. Though they did not personally know him, not a lot of people owned a Porsche around these parts. A truck parked at the side of the Porsche, and from it jumped out a few boys who proudly wore the Beacon Hills jackets. A young smug boy and girl came out from the Porsche with the former eyeing Malia, while the latter looked as if nothing was more important than her nails. Great. A pack of jocks. Malia rolled her eyes and would normally have bared her proverbial fangs at them, but didn't in consideration of the boy by her side. While he couldn't care less if she roughed up a few people here and there, he was easily irritated and didn't quite know when to back off once he got off. They ignored the group of laughing adolescent normies who took it upon themselves to taunt anybody who passed and got in their car. Annoying. Well, they're specifically built that way. They are higher up the food chain, so they get to pick on those lower down. Malia said and kicked the car into ignition, while Tristan just laid back and let her drive them to their next location. Malia hummed to the tune that played out while Tristan just bopped his head along. The silence was something that they'd grown up being accustomed to. Despite Malia being quite a loud person, Tristan was the very opposite, and even among the differences, they were able to find a common ground that neither took advantage of. The silence was one of them. They knew much about each other than they would have been comfortable with if it were someone else. They being from the same side of the veil also helped a lot despite their rocky start. Sometimes Tristan would burst into spontaneous low laughs as he remembered some of their days back in the woods when they would fight each other. Though Malia could just tear him apart, she somehow didn't make that decision but settled for giving him the scariest growl she could muster and also the bites. Damn, those bites did hurt. It was still the same even now as they would sometimes bicker, and though Tristan always did never say much, Malia understood all the tics he had. All of them. The number of times he had to stop Malia from killing people who pissed her off were quite numerous, as the young girl's aversion to taking a life was minute at best and non-existent at least. That also did in no way insinuate that she was the only bloodthirsty one among their two. He was just the one who was less to react. His pissed-off point was about the same as Malia's, but he just lacked the necessary energy to show it most of the time. We're here. Her voice woke him up from his half-asleep state with a groan as he found that the car was packed facing a boutique. Why again? He asked, not really seeing why they had to spend the next few hours just browsing through clothes, while only a few minutes for paying. Because we need new clothes. You might not care much since you pretty much sleep in every day, but I do. Your wardrobe is lacking in seasons and style. She directly quoted Lori, the girl who she taught her most of the things she knew about being a girl. It was one of the most irritating and embarrassing moments of her life, but she soldiered on as she knew how important it was. From hygiene to fashion, from fashion to sensuality, from sensuality to romance and everything else in between. Satomi's pack didn't huddle up every time as they had things to do and lives to live, but they made sure to stay in constant contact with each other in case one needed help or in case of hunters, though neither of them have met the fabled hunters, so they were in the clear for now. Lori. Malia groaned because she knew how Jack's hit she was at lying, and nodded but with a determined gaze that slightly started breaking as she started speaking. She said you need to look more oomph. Something about getting girls to like you more, and you trying to make friends outside of those from the pack. One of Tristan's eyes opened up slowly as a part of the sentence caught his attention. Girls. Hey, don't look at me like that. I wasn't the one who said it. Malia raised her hand in defense at his slightly accusatory stare. Tristan let out a long sigh before he started speaking in a very slow and low tone. Apart from the obvious fact that you'll tear any girl's necks off if they tried getting too close to me, I don't really see the need for that. And besides, It's not like you're ever going anywhere without me tagging along anyway." He knew exactly what it was she wanted to hear, and despite their connection with each other, Malia could get rather paranoid about unimportant matters. "Exactly." She beamed up before opening the doors in an all-too-good mood for some light shopping. "Come on, let's go. The clothes aren't going to shop themselves if we stay in the car all day," she said to him while peeking her head through the window because he remained sitting even when she got out. "And remember that we also have a game to catch up to this evening." The groan inside the car intensified as she said that before he forced himself out of the seat. "Come on, smile a bit, will ya? I don't think people frown and brood like that when going shopping. I can't imagine another girl handling all that brood and dead eyes like I can, so you should always be thankful you have me around." Even though he wanted to try and refute what she said, his mouth just wouldn't open because of a few reasons other than she was right. Sure, he'd learned how to express himself with gestures such as smiles and frowns from Brett, but character was not something he could learn from someone else, let alone a werewolf. And she wasn't all that wrong when she said she couldn't imagine a girl taking a liking to him as he was the same. Walking behind Malia into the boutique, he couldn't help but note that it wasn't as crowded as he thought it'd be, which was something he was thankful for. He didn't have any problems with crowds or people whatsoever, but if he were to ever be given a preference, he'd rather there was no there in the beginning. He was no loner by any means since he was pretty much around people most of the time, but that didn't mean he didn't prefer the solitude. Not to mention that he found most conversations mildly irritating since strangers often found the monotonous reply off-putting. It'll take a special kind of someone other than Satomi's pack members to fully understand what he wanted to say without him actually saying it. The members of Satomi's pack had grown rather used to his way of speaking, noticing early on that his preferred way of speaking was with the fewest words possible. Oftentimes, he just let his gaze do the talking, and even then, they'll still manage to get what he wanted to say. So it wasn't that he was socially awkward, he just didn't like prolonging things more than absolutely necessary. That was one of the numerous things he and Malia had in common. "Hey, eyes up front. We'll be starting with yours, since it takes more time than mine." Without even giving him the time to answer her, she dragged him along with her and went towards the men's section. Despite his quiet nature, Tristan was awfully picky about his wardrobe article, which left Malia doing the shopping for him most times as she knew his preference more than anyone. To an outsider with a superficial observation, it looked a lot like she was babysitting him and tending to his needs most of the time, but that wasn't entirely true. She was usually burdened with things he didn't attach a lot of significance to, like clothes shopping for example. If it was any other thing, he wouldn't even let her make any decision since she could be pretty dumb at times, like getting foodstuffs for example. It was a silent agreement between the two of them that she'd take care of him while he'd take care of them. As long as he didn't show enough interest, she could pretty much drag him along into any of her shenanigans and he wouldn't show much opposition. Unfortunately, the unspoken arrangement seemed to favor her highly, as she always had something that needed him to be brought along. It was also a blessing in disguise, as that meant that he was mostly present whenever she had the urge to rip someone's head off. Finding a lounge to sit on, he let her wander around to look for anything that caught her eye despite the fact that it was supposed to be his shopping. Due to his extremely picky tastes, he would only pick a few of the clothes that she brought for him to glance through, making her dive back into the fray of clothes. Similar to Brett, Lori, Chung, and a few other young pack members, Satomi supported them financially with monthly allowances and took care of their schooling since she apparently had some old money that she didn't let any of them know about. And despite the fact that they'd often butt heads whenever she seldom came to visit, it was pretty evident to anyone who watched them that she adored the young war-coyote in her own stern way. A reminiscent fondness that always passed through her eyes every time she saw the headstrong girl. Though she was stern with everyone, Tristan included, which made them respect her even more, Malia was the only one that refused to budge despite the number of times she'd been beaten in a spar by the old woman. This also made Malia not very lenient in her spending if Tristan wasn't there since she knew Satomi would always fund it to the bill. Seeing how they would waste a lot of time here, Tristan sighed and got up from his comfortable seat to help reduce their shopping time since he knew they had a game to be present this evening. Lori would be pretty mad at him if they missed Brett's game after all. Without saying a word to Malia, he started going through the hangers of clothes on display, sifting through them while looking for something simple yet classy without being too luxurious. "How about this one? I think it'll look good on you." She held out a long-sleeved checkered shirt that had the two sleeves in alternating colors. He looked at the shirt for a while before nodding, prompting her to move to the next one. They spent over an hour on his side of shopping before they moved on to hers. Different from the male section, The female section was more open and had way too numerous samples laid out for the interested eyes to peruse. Malia led him around with an air of familiarity, showing how much she frequented the place, and brought him to a part of the section that had a lot of changing rooms. "Wait here." Leaving him stranded like a troublesome child, she made her way towards one of the lines she'd scoped out the moment they entered the female section. She didn't fancy skirts all that much, pretty much had an aversion to them, so she browsed out a few jean pants and shorts that appealed to her before moving on to the hard part of any shopping spree, shopping for tops. Since she had pretty much ironed out her own style, it took a much shorter time for her to find out what she needed than when she was shopping Tristan. Having gotten the few pieces she liked, she went back to where she had left Tristan by tracking his scent, which was pretty hard to find only if she wasn't that familiar with it. "You're back," was all he said while reclining on the chair he sat, showing no intent on moving an inch from his resting spot. Ignoring his comment and trusting her senses in case anyone was nearby, which was unlikely since this was a very secluded spot that they usually use whenever she brought him out for shopping, she unbuttoned her shirt, leaving her in only her pants and bra before picking up one shirt and changing into it while Tristan stared with half-lidded eyes. He had grown accustomed to seeing her naked after living with her for so long. "How does it look?" Seemingly not caring about his blatant stare as she changed. She was not an exhibitionist by any stretch of the word, but she had no shame if she wanted to show off her body to anyone. Currently, the only people who've gotten to see her naked on numerous occasions were Tristan, Lori, and one occasion Brett. Didn't stop Tristan from growling at him until he knew not to look though. "Good," he said before gesturing for her to continue trying out the clothes she bought. Not because he wanted to continue looking, but because he wanted to get out of the boutique faster. Seeing him urging her on, she continued trying out a few shirts, leaving the pants for when they got home. By the time they left the boutique, it was a few minutes past 3 p.m., which was actually a lot late as they had a game to attend, and also needed to eat before leaving for the game that was due to kick off in a little over an hour's time. Picking up her bags while he held his, they made their way to the cashier to pay for the clothes they bought. With that out of the way, they finally made their way to their car after being gone from it for over 2 hours, much to Tristan's chagrin. After offloading their bags in the back seat, they left the boutique for their home with Tristan driving this time around as he sped through the tarred road of Beacon Hills, taking care not to go over the speed limit as he rushed them home. "What are we eating?" Malia asked as she slurped out of a juice box she had gotten from a vending machine at the side of the boutique. Tristan had a look of uncertainty in his eyes as he drove while trying to come up with something they'll both like for dinner, but couldn't come up with any, so he just shrugged. "We could go for something easy, like fried rice? We got chicken, so might as well," Malia suggested. Another testimony to their unique relationship was once again evident. Malia couldn't cook Jack's hit, so Tristan was the one who took care of their meals every day, but even though he constantly did that, Malia was the one who mostly decided what they ate. His diet was a little bit special, so unlike his choice of clothes, he wasn't picky about his food. Okay. The house they rented was a 2-bedroom flat with a small backyard that they had gotten for cheap from an old couple that wanted to permanently move outstate. The history behind how they got the house was covered in a lot of drama from Malia, when she had vehemently refused to go back to the house she'd once lived in with her parents and suggested that they rather get a new one. Tristan knew she still had a little bit of trauma from her past, though it wasn't as pronounced as it was in the past, so he acquiesced to her demands since he was fine either way. The only reason they went for a 2-bedroom was just because it was spacious and also due to the visits from Lori when she wasn't with Brett and didn't want to stay with another member of the pack. Malia and Tristan used one room as they've always done since they met each other, that the other room had already been designed by Lori to suit her tastes as it was practically hers at this point. "I don't think rice is going to be ready before the game starts, so we'll have to make do with leftovers and finish up the cooking when we're back," Tristan said to Malia as she came to the kitchen after taking a bath. Compared to before, he was more relaxed and speaking freely as it was just the two of them. "I think there are some pizza leftovers from this morning," Malia said and went to check the fridge to confirm. "Yup. I think we can manage with this until we get back. Why don't you go shower while I heat this up for us?" Taking her suggestion, he went to their room to take off his clothes and proceeded to enter the adjacent bathroom to take his bath. After a thorough wash, he put on some light clothing despite the fact that it was pretty chilly around this time of the year before making his way back to the living room where Malia had already started snacking on their meal. "Couldn't wait for me, huh?" he said as he took a slice, only to find a head falling on his lap. "I knew you were coming." He looked at the clock and saw a little over half an hour left, enough time to arrive before the whistle blew for the game, and decided to just rest a bit while petting her long hair and sometimes twirling it around his hands. "We should get going before it's too late. Wouldn't want Lori to bitch at us for coming late," Malia said, but Tristan just hummed at her and continued doing what he was doing, while also eating his slice of pizza before going for another one. "We still have 30 minutes on us. There's no need to rush, and besides, the pizza isn't finished yet." They both sat on the stands, lucky enough that Lori had reserved some seats for them, somehow knowing that they'd be running the time to its edge for their arrival. The reserved seats were only a few rows behind the players, so they were able to get a good enough look for the whole game. "What held you guys up? The game is about to start." Lori ran to them the moment she caught their scents and shouted at them before dragging them to where she had been able to secure their seats. "Malia." Tristan wasted no time in throwing Malia under the bus and leaving her to deal with the hypergirl. Being one of the few people who taught him how to learn compassion, Lori was someone he was rather fond of despite only understanding what he felt for her a little while back. "Turns out emotions aren't that easy to learn." "What?" Malia. "I told you to make sure you guys come early, Arg. Brett is starting, so you guys are going to help me cheer him up," Lori said with a tone of finality, and sat them down with Tristan in the middle, while giving them a few signs to hold. She was a really determined sister. Having fallen into her pace, they both held up a Brett is no. 1 foot and you are the best Brett sign while Lori wore a #1 glove. The game started off with Beacon Hills quickly winning the ball and immediately making a run towards Devonford Prep's goalie, while they did their best to defend. It could be seen pretty easily that while Devonford Prep's team wasn't exactly solid, they made sure to capitalize on every chance they got by passing to the person with the highest probability to score. Beacon Hills, on the other hand, had a rather solid team but not strong enough that they could easily overpower Devonford Prep. The first goal was eventually won by Beacon Hills, which officially opened the game as far as the players were concerned. Though Tristan didn't understand the game all that much, he at least knew the simplicity of scoring a point and winning further ahead without anyone needing to explain it to him. "Go Brett." Subconsciously, Tristan raised the sign in his hands as Lori cheered for her elder brother, along with the crowd as Brett got the ball and started weaving through the defense before risking a long shot a few meters away from the goalie and his 2 defenders. The crowd erupted in a more manic cheer that even Malia was drawn into as Brett's shot landed on the net, signifying a tie in the score. The game was just starting, and it was already getting heated up with the players doing all what they could to score against an evenly matched opponent before the fatigue started kicking in. "Brett's pretty good, isn't he?" Lori nudged Tristan on his sides, waving one of her hands in the air in the hopes of signaling her brother. "Yeah, he is," was Tristan's honest reply as he knew the amount of time and effort Brett had put in to get a sportsmanship scholarship, just so he could get Lori into Devonford Prep with him. It wasn't about his supernatural reflexes and physique. Though it did help a lot as it kept him in top shape throughout the game, the experience was something he entirely worked hard for, though it's pretty much early on to decide if they'll win. He added. He could spot a few good players on Beacon Hill's side, Whitmore, Mahealani, and Greenberg, who seemed to have a good synergy with each other, with Whitmore taking most of the goals. Devonford lacks many good players unlike Beacon Hills, but that doesn't stop us from playing with all we got. Brett might be a freshman, but he's good enough to play first line. We've got a list of freshmen this year, but most of them are still rough and the coach have no reason but to bench them. Lori took her time in between cheers to explain the dynamic between the two teams and also what she'd learned from Brett to Tristan. Having grown up in the midst of the pack after they lost their family, Tristan and Malia were two people she'd truly open up to, with Malia been the airhead brute elder sister of sorts and Tristan been some sort of a younger brother to her, despite the fact that he was most likely older than her, which could be attributed to the fact that she practically helped raise him. It was a very weird relationship, but that was just how it was between the four of them. Unfortunately, even if Brett can hold his team up due to his supernatural physique, he can't cover the whole team, so they'll start to lose once his teammates can't keep up. The coach must have taken that into consideration given how Brett is doing most of the forward runs since he has the most stamina. It's a tight hoop, but they can win if they manage to hold on for some time and hope their changes can cover their apparent weakness. Tristan's eyes narrowed as he paid a lot of his attention to the game while giving his own observations to her. Despite hearing what he said and knowing how true it was since even Brett had pointed that out, she still forced Tristan and Malia to put up their signs to motivate her brother. They watched as Beacon Hill's coach called for a timeout and started shouting rather enthusiastically to one of his players. Even though they didn't strain their senses to hear what was being said, they all knew the player was probably getting a dressing down from Beacon Hill's infamous coach. The game resumed after a quick change on both sides, with Devonford being ahead with 3 points. "Hey, Laurie." Tristan called out to the girl, who had resumed her cheering after Brett had gotten the ball, but unfortunately he was tackled to the ground, which made him lose the ball. "That's a foul, you stupid ref." She screamed at the ref, who didn't blow the whistle for Brett's tackle. "You called me." She turned to him after getting it out of her system. "Yeah. I was wondering which school to go to when the new year starts. I'm thinking Beacon Hills because of their lax system rather than Devonford." Satomi had asked during her last visit what they wanted to do, because even though she let her pack do as they wanted, she still valued productivity. "An idle mind is the devil's workshop," was something she'd always tell Tristan whenever they spoke. Unlike the others, who had something that took most of their time, Malia and Tristan had nothing going for them and spent the whole day hanging in the woods, since that was Malia's comfort zone, as well as Tristan's. Despite them being werewolves and Tristan being what he is, that didn't make them animals with low base instincts. She'd suggested they find something doing or waste their time going to school like Brett and Laurie were doing. All they needed to do was pass the exams, and she'd take care of the rest. Hearing his words, Laurie's upbeat attitude seemed to have calmed down a bit as she held her face down. "So you want to go to Beacon Hills?" "MHM. I managed to convince Malia too." The reason he took his time to explain to her his reasons for wanting to go to Beacon Hills rather than the prestigious Devonford Prep was because he knew exactly what he meant to her. She was like an older and younger sister to him, and also being one of the few people she was really close to, since Satomi's pack weren't living together, so it was just her and Brett. Despite being her brother, he was also one of the few friends she had, so he knew how she was feeling after finding out he wasn't going to apply for Devonford Prep. Not that he was that good with his studies to begin with. "Ah, that sucks. You don't have to worry about me, Trist. And it's not like I don't know where you live." Looking at her eyes that seemed to be devoid of any falsehood, he nodded and focused back on the game. "I think I'm gonna go grab some snacks. Don't let anybody take my spot." Laurie stood up and handed her glove to Tristan before hurrying to get the snacks, so she wouldn't miss much of the game. "Sue, how'd she take it?" Malia asked after having her fun, pretending like she wasn't there during the entirety of the conversation. "MHM," was the only shrug of a response she received. "I still don't know why we have to go to school, Trist. Is Satomi still angry that I blew through our funds last month? That's why she suggested we go to school." Malia had every right to be irritated. Unlike the others, she was more in touch with her animal side than her human side, and she seemed to be perfectly fine with it, except on full moons. Despite the fact that the pack followed Buddhist practices and their teachings, Malia was the sole exception to it. Even when she was in control of her emotions, she'd always pick the most violent resolution to any conflict, and behind her was always Tristan silently following behind. She was more coyote than a human teen. That or work. Those were the only choices Satomi gave to Tristan. She spoke to him because she didn't want to have an aneurysm arguing with Malia, so she opted to speak with the most level-headed of the dunce duo. She just couldn't let them spend their entire day in the woods after all. Work? Ugh. And Malia was also a lazy coyote when the situation didn't involve baring her fangs at things she hated. Telling her to work under someone, most likely a human for that matter, was just asking for blood to be spilled. Can't we just say no? She can't force us to do something we don't want, right? For her question, Tristan only had one word to say that made her reconsider. Allowance. Malia immediately got the message. The old hag was threatening their allowance by forcing them to make a choice between going to school or looking for a job. And between the two choices, Malia hated the latter with a passion which left the former with the only avenue they could take. And if they were both being completely honest with themselves, the school deal seemed to benefit them, as they could just use the next few years to laze around as they went through high school and college. They both looked at each other, having come to the same conclusion that made the option of going to school not look so bad. They saved their allowance and also get to laze around and do the least amount of studying to stay afloat. Basically 2 birds with 1 stone. "Hey guys, I'm back. What did I miss?" Laurie asked as she sat back in her seat before passing them the drinks and chips she got them. "Nothing much. Just that Beacon's Whitmore scored a few goals which put them ahead, again," Malia said as she popped open the bag of chips. "That reminds me. Are you thinking of joining the lacrosse team?" She directed her question at Tristan, who shook his head as he took a sip from his drink. Joining the lacrosse team was an intriguing prospect, but he was certain he wasn't going to enjoy it, and not to mention that he'd rather spend his time either with Malia at home or in the forest, with Malia. There was no way he would dedicate his new school year to a game that required constant practice and expectations from him, and he was fully aware of why Laurie asked that question. Halftime was called for the game, giving the heavily taxed players some respite and well-deserved resting time. Laurie dragged them towards Brett, who had finally pulled himself away from their team planning for the last half. "Hey guys. Didn't think you'd come." Brett waved at them as they made their way closer. "Well, Laurie said she'd drag us out if we didn't show up before the opening whistle, so we had no choice. Not to mention that I had to convince the emotionally deficient teen by my side." Malia's snarky comment gained a look of surprise and sarcasm from Brett and Laurie, while Tristan just glared at her only for her to shrug it off like air. It was hard to say which one was the emotionally deficient one out of the both of them. "Well, I'm glad you guys could come. I'm pretty sure we can win this thing, so I'm kinda stoked. It also helps that gives us more ammunition over those bastards from Beacon Hills High." Brett held his lacrosse stick over his shoulder while gazing at the herd of players from Beacon Hills as he listened in on their conversation. Malia beamed and glanced at Brett. "Whoops. Looks like you're being targeted." They all listened in on the conversation between the coach and the squad of Beacon Hills High, since there were no rules against or stopping them from doing so. Instead of being intimidated, Brett laughed it off while looking smug. "If they are seriously planning a formation around me, means they consider me that much of a threat. It just means I'm that good. Well, see you guys after the game. Looks like the final half is about to start. Wish me luck." He put on his helmet and jogged back to the field to take his position with the rest of the players. "Are you sure he's gonna be okay? I don't think the other team is going to be that lenient with taking him out of the game." Laurie voiced her concern as they made their way back to their seats, which hopefully had not been taken. "He's a born werewolf. He'll be fine," Tristan said as a matter of fact. What were a group of teenage human lacrosse players going to do to a werewolf like Brett? The most they could do was break a few things, and he'll heal it back right up. "I know that, but it wouldn't be pretty if he gets irritated for a moment and fouls one of them aggressively." Wolves weren't the most passive of animals, so it was a valid concern. Regardless of how many years of training and experience they've had with controlling their urges and emotions, at the end of the day they were still a wolf, and as such was bound to behave like one when threatened. "I for one think he'll benefit from it if he were to mildly injure one of them. Maybe a few broken bones and ankles. Should be enough for the rest to know not to mess with him." Malia chimed in and said the most ridiculous thing with the most nonchalant expression she had. They went back to watching the game with gusto. At least one of them did, while the other two just stared on as if they could come up with a more fun activity within that time frame. Unfortunately, Beacon Hills High ended up winning the game by a few narrow goals, which made the hypergirl slump her shoulders, a reaction shared by the other Devonford students. "Come on, it's just a game. There's no need to get that down." Malia, being the one with the lowest EQ, poked the girl at her back while her partner in crime nodded along. It's not as if this was the only game they were going to play, since they still have a few years before graduation, was the thought process of the duo. Unlike the downcast Laurie, Brett looked pretty normal despite the fact that his team lost. Though it wasn't just a game to him, he did try his best without tipping the line, so there was nothing else he could do than wait for their next game. "How about you guys come to our place? Tristan wanted to make fried rice before we came, but there was no time, so we scraped it until after the game," Malia suggested, and since it wasn't school night, they didn't need to worry about waking up late tomorrow. "Yeah, let's go." The drive back home was filled with conversations about a lot of things, and for once, Tristan didn't mind the long talks. Devonford Prep might have some stringent rules and workload, but it's not that bad, and I honestly think it's much better than Beacon Hills High. They were seated in the living room, each with a plate of fried rice and chicken and a few drinks to go with it. "Study." Tristan grimaced at the thought of being forced to score above a certain point just to keep up with the grades. Though Beacon Hills High still stressed grade, it wasn't as cutthroat as Devonford Prep. "Well, you're right about that. And here I was thinking you'd choose Devonford so I could force you into playing lacrosse." Brett sighed at what he considered a misfortune. Malia, though, didn't seem to share his sentiment. "I don't think I can spend an entire month in that stuck-up place without ripping someone's throat out." Speaking of ripping someone's throat out, I heard a body's been found and they're saying it's an animal attack. The joking atmosphere in the living room receded and was replaced by a somber one. It could very well be anything. Lori said. The implications of this meant a lot of things if their assumptions were right. A stray werewolf. An omega. They doubt it was a pack because they would have heard word of one coming to Beacon Hills. If it were a pack, then it would have to be a scarily stealthy one and also one of killers. Hopefully it was the former and not the latter. You guys are all the way over here in Beacon County, so try and stay grounded and don't forget to call if you sniff out anything suspicious. Though they were not one to go looking for trouble, it still wouldn't hurt to remind them. What if it's an omega? Are we killing him? Malia asked only for her to be shot down unanimously by the siblings. No. Why? Because Beacon Hills is Hale's territory. But the Hale's been gone for a while. No one even knows if any of them survived the fire. Regardless of reason, we shouldn't be looking to confront whoever it is that's causing the killings. Hopefully they move on away from here quickly, or it might draw the attention of the hunters. That was Brett's major concern. Beacon Hills had been rather quiet after the Hale fire, which made both the hunters of then and the resident supernaturals move out of the territory because of the lack of a leader of the hills, which in turn was the reason why the hunters left, because the normal populace were no longer under the shadow threat of the packs that once roamed the area. But if word were to get out that an omega or an unscrupulous werewolf pack were back and were killing innocents, then they'll have no choice but to come back and wipe out or chase out the pack. Rather than placate her thoughts, Brett's words only made Malia more curious. What's the deal with the hunters anyway? They're just a group of humans, right? Why do we have to be cautious of them? I really don't know, but according to Satomi, the hunters have been around since the emergence of the first werewolf, and though they've branched out throughout the years, the main family still exists to this day. They know every weakness of a werewolf, and unlike us who most times than not lose ourselves to our urges, Malia didn't even bat an eye at the low jab and just continued listening. They are trained from a young age to be cold, precise and lethal at every moment notice when dealing with our kind. So yes, even alphas as old and strong as Satomi are bound to be cautious when they are in the same territory as a hunter family. Lucky for us, they do live by a strict code to only go after those who've taken a human's life. Grrrrl Brett released a sigh of frustration as two pairs of blue eyes stared at him with fangs bared as if daring him to repeat what he just said. Unlike Malia's bright blue, Tristan's were of a more darker shade that signified something more in his supernatural status that only a few people were aware of. Now you know why I said you both should keep your distance. If you were to come across a hunter, we'll need Satomi back here in order to clear your names, since they are not the most amicable bunch when supernaturals are involved. Brett's explanation made the glow in the two pairs of eyes recede, giving him more breathing room to continue. While it's advisable to keep our distance, if we were to come across whoever it is, it should be our priority to stop them. No sane supernatural community will condone random killings. Sue, we can just kill them to prevent the hunters from coming back here then? Brett outright ignored her for the sake of his sanity, and also to make sure not to lose the leash on his emotions and go on a rampage. What do you know about the hunters and the Hales? Tristan asked in a bid to change the subject and also curb Malia's rising murder tendency. Not much, I'm afraid. All I know is that Satomi seems to be somewhat familiar with the Hale Alpha when they were alive, and some rumors that there were apparently a lot of alphas in Beacon Hills when they were alive. Due to the fact that a lot of supernaturals were in Beacon Hills, an agreement was made between the alphas and the hunters with the Hales as the mediator between the two groups. You'll have to ask Satomi if you want to know more about how Beacon Hills was a few years ago. Though he was born a werewolf, he'd never met a Hale due to the fact that his family was just a normal werewolf family, and he had no idea if they were even part of an active pack. Not to mention that he was still a child then with explosive outbursts. He had reasons to be worried because he understood just how messy werewolves who gave into their urges could be. He and Jiang had almost killed themselves a few years back after they got into a heated argument, and that was just a squabble when compared to werewolves who got hung up on the taste of blood. At this point, they were still in the clear since it's only 2 killings so far, but the more it piles up and the more the news and rumors spread about it being an animal going on a hunting spree, it won't take long before Beacon Hills become a hub for hunters wanting to protect the human populace from a rabid werewolf. He would have preferred it if they stopped such activities from going too far, but Satomi's pack had been known, even by hunters, to stay away from other supernaturals, which was also the reason why he wasn't that fearful about Tristan and Malia being under the scopes of the hunters. Even renowned hunting families across the continent knew or have heard of the reclusive Buddhist pack. It wasn't their problem, so it was in their best interest and that of their alpha not to interfere, not even if a pack found guilty were to be wiped out. Going against the core tenets of the Buddhist pact was synonymous to betrayal. And if there was one thing the hunters hated most among the supernatural community, more than werewolves, were omegas. The lone wolf. The one who prefers betrayal to family. The taint of a wolf's pride. Whoosh! Tristan dodged backwards to avoid the clawed swipe from Brett, only for him to welcome the kick that connected too fast to his midsection that forcefully took the air out of his lungs. You're still sloppy. I don't know how you are able to react to anything happening to you and also be that sloppy. If I didn't know you as much as I do, I'd think you were zoning out mid-fight. Brett grunted as he massaged his shoulders that still had to deal with the morning cramps. You don't need to feel that bad though, since it'll naturally be hard to deal with me who've had years to get used to my heightened movements. Tristan nodded his head and pushed himself off the ground and patted his butt. It was basic knowledge that any supernatural should have at least some method of self-protection given the interchangeably relationship between them and their world. It took only a second for a hunter to turn hunted. It was the reason why supernaturals with greater physical capabilities than others often find themselves being exertive in their daily life, focusing on either sports or something that dealt with energy exertion or hard labor. It would be a waste to not put their gifts into use after all. Since Tristan and Malia spend most of their time indoors, they sometimes find themselves looking for alternate ways to expend the excess energy they accumulate every day, which fortunately Satomi was able to deal with by suggesting frequent spars, since they clearly weren't that much of the meditative sort, especially Malia. While they did keep to most of her teachings, and also those of the ancient Buddhists. A wolf was a wolf at the end of a day, as Satomi would always say when their brute actions were brought to her notice. Too bad they ended up in a pack where self-productivity was their pivotal point, not that they were complaining. It's Saturday and apart from practice at noon, I'm free all day. We need to resharpen your fangs before the start of the new year. I meant that figuratively. Doubly so for Malia. Well, damn me. Tristan cursed under his breath, not caring of the fact that Brett clearly heard him. It wasn't actually a fault on his part, as there were bound to be a few disparity when the person concerned had a very low danger sense when compared to other animalistic supernaturals in a quite straightforward, blunt, and literal way. Very quite often would he find himself remembering spontaneous moments of his earliest memories. Vivid picturesque motions of still nights, warm furs, and bright half-moons. It was the same reason why they, at most times, find themselves gravitating towards the forest. Those were the most serene memories either of them had, and also the most peaceful. And despite though that their actions and thoughts were very different, they represented the teaching Satomi taught them in their own way, wanting nothing but serenity, and yet always using the beast in them to strive for it in a way that was completely opposite to their teachings. For a pack, their every action and conduct were a reflection of the teachings of their alpha, as it was basic for all alphas to have their betas in line at all times, whether they were present or not. It was also very reminiscent of the way they hunt in packs, and why every hunter who hunts a wolf should always expect to see the retaliation of its pack. No other animal in the wild and those domesticated by man showcased the strength and value of a bond as much as the wolves did. A bond that all but sired the betas to their alphas, that the very act of betrayal and rebellion cursed them to be hated and shunned by all packs, leaving them with no other option than to migrate from their valley and true family to a one where they aren't known, which in all honesty didn't reduce their stigma in any way. After all, who in their right mind will let the lone wolf into their midst? There was a common knowledge among every supernatural: a wolf is always stronger in a pack. Since they acted as a reflection to their pack and alpha, the concept of strength in numbers becomes a reality to them, growing stronger, faster, and fiercer in every physical and literal way. As much as a blessing as it was to the night crawlers, it was also a curse. Too basic was it known that the most easiest way to completely destroy a wolf's pack is to go for the wolf that strayed from the pack. So whether they liked it or not, they were expected and bound to represent Satomi in every area of their lives. They are expected to be strong if she was strong and compassionate if she was kind. So even if they act in a way sometimes alien to Satomi's teachings, no one doubted their loyalty and respect to the old woman who took them under her fangs. That was the reason why both of them couldn't refuse the expressive requests of Satomi. It was the reason why Satomi made sure they were able to protect themselves from certain amounts of danger. Unfortunately for Tristan, being able to fully protect yourself was heavily dependent on how you sense and react to danger. It was the simple law of the jungle that only those who are able to adapt and react to changes were eligible to pass the natural selection. Tristan's case were somehow special. Satomi had no idea what kind of human child he was except for the fact that he was the best candidate to be her beta than she'd ever seen in her life. Even as a human, he imprinted on Malia exactly like a wolf, or exactly as she had done on him, reflecting the actions of an ideal beta to an alpha. It was what made her hesitant on giving him the bite, as she was worried about if he didn't have enough time to form an image of himself. Despite it being a mouth-watering delectable to most alphas, Satomi had grown to appreciate self-productivity in her long life. Unfortunately, he had mirrored a part of Satomi in a very bad way. He was slow to act in the face of danger in a very literal sense, as more than everyone. He resonated with Satomi's reclusiveness the most, only acting when he was attacked instead of at the show of hostility. While a humble way of living, Brett would argue that Tristan took it too far, even if he did it subconsciously. I'll admit that it sometimes gets irritating to see how different you are from Malia. She'll try to rip out my throat at any given chance. His eyes flashed golden yellow as he readied himself for any avenue of Tristan's attack. I'll love to rip out your throat at any chance I get, but we both know if I act on that urge you'll still be able to make me regret it. Aside from how different he perceived danger, he still had to control his emotions every now and then, but it got more harder to keep yourself from lashing out the more you were provoked. Unlike the werewolves of Satomi's pack, there was a fact about him that made him different in nature from them. It was how susceptible he was to blood and bloodlust. While wolves relished the thrill of the hunt and devouring of the fallen prey, all he cared about was drawing as much blood as he could and giving back the pain he received. It was due to the clash of all these different sensations that slowed how he reacted to danger. His bestial instincts, his alpha's ideals, his own thoughts, and most importantly, how he perceived the incoming danger. For someone who had learned how to experience emotions from others, these strong feelings clashing at the same time was enough for him to blank out a few times during conflicts. The main reason for this was the lack of identity he had experienced. Regardless of the shortcomings he has at first sight, the nature of a beast is truly shown when he bares his fangs. Unfortunately, that still didn't prevent Brett from throwing him against the hard ground. Why do you even look so strained early in the morning? Your movements are slower than usual. Brett uncorked the water bottle and took a swing of it while Tristan remained sprawled on the ground. I prefer hunting. A sad thing about Tristan was that, just like every true creature of the night, he was not a morning person. Brett kept in shape at all times due to his constant lacrosse practice and daily exercises, unlike Tristan, whose idea of what an exercise was mostly amounts to running through the woods with Malia. They sometimes went hunting, mostly following Malia, and hunted down small animals. It trained their senses and made them more attuned to their surroundings, but they had stopped doing that when Brett and Laurie got into Devonford. Of course, it would only make sense that Brett would start kicking his ass. Hunting or not, your bad habits are starting to show after being too lazy. Brett threw the bottle at him, which he caught without even looking at it. Tristan nodded at his words, not taking it fully to heart, fully aware of the fact that unlike him, Brett and Laurie had an easier time getting their emotions under control than he did. They both were born werewolves after all. Tristan stood up from the ground while taking deep gulps of water and following Brett back into their house. Brett understood where Tristan was coming from. Tristan had unnaturally good senses even before he was turned, so the only reason he prevented himself from actively reacting to everything around him was due to the fact that he felt too much. Satomi had once commented on how he was even able to smell the mood of people easily. It would have been a good thing for him, but his bloodlust had ended up ruining it for him. Heightened emotions and bloodlust didn't mix well after all. Satomi had done her best to help him fight those urges, giving him an edge over others when it came to restraining themselves. It took a special kind of temper and tolerance to be able to deal with Malia all day. He walked inside his room to see Malia sitting crossed-legged on their bed with her eyes closed and ignored her in favor of entering the bathroom. Maybe going to school won't be so bad since Brett and Laurie seem to really enjoy every part of it. He thought as he sat on the top and let the water flow. He took in deep breaths as every trickle of the cold water grazed his skin. He was better at meditation than Malia since it actually helped him control his bloodlust and stopped him from acting on every violent impulse he got. So he found himself partaking of the exercise every time he needed peace and quiet or to clear his muddled mind. 3 things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. As much as it was a mantra to help them take back control of themselves, it was also a grim reminder that no matter how good they try to hide under the calm facade they project outwards, it still doesn't change the fact that they are monsters deep within. It helped them accept that fact about themselves instead of fearing and running away from it. The devil you no longer fear can only be your friend. The more they learn not to fear and lose control of their baser emotions, the more they gain control of themselves. A stick and carrot method that didn't take away the reality of their situation. There was a reason they were mostly identified as shapeshifters. All it would take is a small incident, and they would rip off their human mask to bare their fangs. Deep in his meditation, he failed to notice when someone entered the bathroom. Malia Tate POV. Malia woke up with a pair of familiar warm arms around her that made her snuggle deeper into it to draw more warmth from them. She was the extremely cuddly type of person, and that made her more thankful that the person she loved the most was exactly like her. She could remember a few times where Tristan actually sleepwalked because she wasn't on their bed. She was doubtful that there was anyone in her pack who shared the same kind of connection she had with Tristan, something Satomi herself had said could bring a few troubles if they didn't learn how to keep it tightly bound. Normally that would have been a great advice, but unfortunately for Satomi, neither of them were the types to keep things in despite the withdrawn impression Tristan always had on him. Malia was never one for bottling things in, never had been, and being with someone who was almost the same as her, even in differences to others, was a stroke of good luck for her, and there was no way she was listening to Satomi about keeping things in moderation. Getting comfortable to a certain degree, she grumbled something underneath her breath and forcefully turned both herself and Tristan around, so that the sleeping Tristan was now the one being cuddled. This is good too. They were both naked under the sheets, which was a given when their relationship was taken into consideration, and also the fact that it always felt better for them to sleep with the lightest piece of clothing they had. Since Brett and Lori were no longer around, their peaceful mornings were back to normal without having to wake up very early in the morning because the little werewolf was such a training freak. If it was up to Malia, then she would have gladly gouged out his stupid golden eyes. At times like these, when she'd be the only one awake, her mind would sometimes wander to the possibilities of if she hadn't found Tristan on that night and hadn't trailed behind him. Though she didn't remember all that much, the feeling was not something a simple memory loss could wash. The little fights they had due to him being stubborn, and the time she'd kill anything that she perceived could harm him while he walked on in ignorance was such a fantastic and important feeling for Malia. Satomi had said they'd imprinted on each other, and to be perfectly honest, she was fine with that. Though no one knew how Tristan's imprinting worked, it was safe to assume that it would be at least of the same nature. He wasn't a werewolf, after all. She wasn't all that knowledgeable about the supernatural communities and the most popular of its inhabitants, which frankly she didn't care enough for, so the nature of Tristan's bond to her was not something she concerned herself with all that much. The reason and nature of his bond didn't matter in the slightest, because if there was one thing she was ever 100% sure of, it was the fact that Tristan would never lie to her, not when it mattered. This was why she wasn't all that excited when Satomi continued her preaching of self-productivity and voiced the opinion of them going to school. It was somehow in the tip of her tongue, a feeling that made her instinctively know that it was somehow going to be a lot of trouble. Mostly to her. She would have preferred moving to another state to school there, but she knew both Satomi and Tristan, even Jiang and Tierney, wouldn't have let her. Satomi wouldn't even make them leave Beacon Hills because it was easier for her to keep surveillance on them, especially if they were in Beacon County. So it had unfortunately boiled down to the two schools she knew that held some sort of favorability with her, which further shrunk down to Devonford and Beacon Hills High. She didn't hesitate to remove Devonford when Brett had given her the required passing grade for their subjects. Though there were other slacking schools that had loose grips on their students' grades, she didn't know them all that much to be confident to choose them, so she had ultimately agreed with Tristan for their choice of Beacon Hills. The only good thing that came out of this arrangement was that Tristan was going to be at the same school as her. As for being in the same class, Malia wasn't that delusional. Hopefully the stupid Omega that had begun attacking the humans was wise enough to change location and leave her Beacon Hills unless he wanted to die if their paths ever crossed. Ring ring smash, she was quick enough to smash the little alarm clock that was just there for decoration, since none of them ever woke up to it. Even if they did, it was just to make it stop before they went back to sleep. Since Brett and Lori are gone, I don't see anything stopping us from wildly letting loose. Thinking along that line of thought, she started nibbling into Tristan's neck while he slept, causing the boy to hum and purr in his sleep. She extended her tongue and gave the taut vein on his neck a lick that caused him to shiver as he woke up. Malia. Malia didn't answer and continued with her ministrations that left the half-awake Tristan exasperated. Planning on making it easier on her and him, he flipped them over that she now straddled him, making her the recipient of his half-lidded eyes. "It's 6 in the morning," he complained, only for him to be completely ignored as Malia attacked his lips and sealed off any objection he would have. Left with no other choice, not that he was ardent in his objection, he reciprocated the kiss while his hands snaked around her waist and drew her closer with firm grips. "Girl." A low feral growl escaped Malia's mouth due to Tristan's enthusiastic actions that she completely reveled in. They broke their kiss, making Tristan draw her closer to himself that their bodies pressed against the other as he started peppering kisses along her neck while trailing it downward to her chest. Her body burned with a fire so passionate that only the person below her could quench, and quench he did. They tumbled in their sheets into the late hours of the morning, making sure they explored each other with an air of familiarity they've cultivated since the time they've known each other. That was fantastic. Malia heaved gusts of breaths as she struggled to get her heart back in pace. The wildness of their proclivities showing in both their bodies and the bed they slept in. With disheveled hair and droopy eyes, bereft of their morning energy, they wrapped their legs over each other as the glow of the morning sex started receding. Since they were the wild sort, none of them bothered stopping until they had spent all their built-up energy from the previous night, leaving them as bags of slobs first thing in the morning. You did jump me first thing in the morning, so… I don't think I want to get up, Tristan said as he combed through her hair with his hands, while the other one ran lines along her spine that caused her to shiver from time to time. Was the only reply she could give as she had made sure to spend all her energy during the rather heated early morning sex, leaving her all mushy. The room stinks, you know? Well, that would be the case for normal humans who would likely perceive the smell of sex if they were to enter the room, but for people like them, they could perceive the raw lust amidst the smell of sex, and it was like their pheromones were being recharged, and if they did nothing to it, it'll peak and they'd be right back to square one, smashing like rabid animals until one of them fainted. It'll air out soon. Turns out Malia didn't care. She was too drowned in the euphoric bliss of morning sex, and the way Tristan soothed her skin that she just didn't care about anything else. All she wanted was for him to hold her tighter, while caressing her back and hair. They remained like that since they were too tired to get up and tried sleeping off until the hunger pangs started hitting them. We're hungry, Malia. Then go cook something. You're not letting me go, Malia. Tristan deadpanned as he felt her legs twisting his in a lock while she cuddled on his chest. She whined like an animal for a while before releasing his legs from hers, only for her hands to wrap around him. Carry me. Her face was covered with her hair sprawled in all directions, but Tristan could see the closed eye and the earnest expression on her face. The girl who'd never show an ounce of vulnerability to anyone was just a cute girl to him. He pushed himself up the bed with the extra weight who conveniently went to his back and hung itself there while he made way to their kitchen, both completely nude. He ignored the Malia strapped to his back and focused on his craft, working the ingredients and utensils in a way that made the scene heartwarming. Malia hummed on his back, a tone that he found himself humming along to, as he chopped ingredients and unwrapped the bacon. Since they were both thoroughly famished, he didn't see the need of denying her favorite food, not even when he craved some bacon. The spread he prepared wasn't that much in terms of diversity, but he made sure the quantity was something they wouldn't be able to finish with just breakfast. He prepared the table but only set a plate as it was quite obvious from the way she still clung to him even though breakfast was done that she wanted him to feed her. Drawing out the chair for himself, he brought the cuddly animal from his back and sat her sideways on his lap before proceeding to feed them both. Breakfast continued with the same energy as it was prepared, with Malia being pampered till she recovered her energy, while Tristan took care of the dishes before taking them both to the bathroom to clean up and get ready for the day. They spent the better part of an hour getting themselves clean as Malia took the chance to get frisky as she cleaned up Tristan's body as repayment for spoiling her this morning. She ended up provoking a reaction that she was all too glad for, which ended up with them expending the little energy they got from their breakfast, though none complained as it was worth every moment. You are insatiable, Malia, was all Tristan could say as they got dressed after putting the final stop to their rather wild Zool life for the day. All the more I'm grateful for having my own personal boy toy to play with whenever I want, she teased before sealing the complaining lips with a short kiss before making her way out of the room. I swear, she'll be the death of me one day. Contrary to his words, his lips were stretched to its end with a content smile, one that Malia mirrored perfectly. Days like these were the most perfect in their eyes, with nothing to sour their mood. This is. Two teenagers could be seen sporting frowns on their faces as they stared at the daily published papers that had an image of dead deer with a spiral at its side. It seems like we were wrong. It's not just a wandering beta, at least not fully. Just when the new school year is about to start. Just our luck, huh? More than anyone, they knew just what signs like that meant, especially when it was a dead animal. Though they didn't know what pack that symbol belonged to, they knew exactly what it meant. Just one thing. Revenge. What are we going to do about that sign? Malia asked as they were both taking a morning walk at Tristan's suggestion, as the house still reeked of their arousal, and them staying in it was just another prelude to another round of mind-blowing sex. It wasn't a wonder why Jiang, Tierney, Laurie and Brett didn't want to stay with them for extended periods of time. Normally they had self-control, but it was hard for them to stop when they started getting into the throes of passion, mostly for Malia. It could be said quite seriously that she was the one who corrupted Tristan, something she took great pride in whenever it was pointed out. "We are not doing anything, Malia. It's none of our business to meddle with the actions of another werewolf, especially when it's done in the name of revenge. Whoever has a grudge will sooner or later answer the call, and hopefully they'll kill themselves and stop increasing the tension in Beacon Hills." It was none of their business, and it also wasn't in their nature to meddle in something that was of no concern to them and they had no connection with. It would be a different case if the question of morality was brought up, but even then they'll still weigh their decision with the effect it'll have on the pack. And besides, vendettas were at most times a prelude to territorial wars, and what he needed the least was getting dragged into a squabble of a part of the supernatural community. Besides, it's not like we're the only werewolf pack on Beacon Hills. Everyone knows to stay in their lane. This way when the hunters come, they won't get dragged into the quagmire. Even if they've never met any of the ones called hunters, some of the older members of the pack have come across them, and they had various impressions of the group. To some of them, the hunters were a self-righteous bunch, while others saw them as a hypocritical group of bloodthirsty, demented humans. Whatever it was, hunters weren't seen favorably by any supernatural, least of all werewolves. Hunters hardly worried themselves about other types of supernatural, unless when they were causing trouble without a smokescreen, but when it came to werewolves, it became personal. There was no hunter who had a favorable impression of a werewolf, just as there was no werewolf who could tolerate their presence. Though surprisingly, Satomi was one of the rare few werewolves who completely accepted the existence of the hunting families as a necessary force. Every other werewolf in Beacon Hills will be doing the same thing as we are, spectating. Oh man. And here I thought we'd do something fun before we start school. Even if she might want some excitement before she starts dealing with other hormonal teenagers, she still understood why no one else was reacting. The situation might have been different if the Hale family were still present, but they weren't. Where are we going anyway? We're meeting up with DeMarco. He called us to see if we could help him move drinks. I think the Beacon Hills graduating year are hosting a party and he got the gig for drinks. That got Malia's attention as the coyote looked like she just got the best idea. Oh, that's nice. Maybe we can just stay at the party after we're done with the drinks. It's a high school graduating party, so no one will notice. I don't see a problem with that, and DeMarco probably wouldn't, but I don't think surrounding ourselves with a booze-infected party and drunk high schoolers is such a good idea. He voiced out his thoughts as the reasonable party, but his accomplice wasted no time in shooting it down. It's a high school party. What could possibly go wrong? You know you just dissed Murphy, right? It's a high school party, Tristan. They are supposed to get wasted as hell and make out with anybody who is anywhere as drunk as them. We on the other hand are a coyote, and you. We'll be totes fine. Thinking about it from her point of view, he had to agree that there was nothing they had to worry about. The only problem was making sure they didn't get as wasted as the others, and since they don't go to the school, no one would be able to tell if they were freshmen or sophomores. He only had to watch out for Malia's intake because even if they had some sort of heightened resistance, they could still get drunk if they go over the limit of their tolerance. They walked over to a bar, owned by DeMarco, another beta of Satomi, and walked in through the back door. It wasn't the first time they've come here, so none of the day workers gave them a hassle. Hey guys. Surprised to see you both here. Their attention was immediately drawn to one of the tables as soon as they entered the bar. On the table were two people, a man and a woman, both being people they were familiar with. Like Tristan and Malia, both were also a part of Satomi's pack. Hey Joanne, Richard. How's it going? Tristan asked as he took a seat by their side. Though he didn't have that much interaction with them, all pack members were family, so he naturally treated them as such. Nothing. We just thought we'll grab a drink before we clock in for work. And I half thought you both preferred being stuck in your caves. We do. They both replied in unison, making them all pause before bursting out in laughter. What are you guys out here for anyway? Joanne, a woman in her mid-20s with short black hair, asked. We got hired as extra muscles. I think he just wants us out of the house, or out of the wild. Not caring about their reaction, Malia took Joanne's half-full glass of cocktail and downed it under the impressed gaze of those at the table. Right. I think I heard DeMarco talking about that. It's supposed to be some victory/graduation party for the Beacon Hill seniors since they won. What I would give to have fun at a high school party and just get wasted. Those were the days. Joanne said with a forlorn look on her face while Richard nodded. So high school is supposed to be fun. As the one who detested going back to school from the duo, Malia never spared a chance when she came across reliable sources and always asked them how high school was. So far she has gotten varying responses from the people she's asked. Most of the people still in high school either complain and bitch about it, or they say it's satisfactory, or any other mid-response they could give. Conversely, every other person she's asked who graduated high school only had good and fun things to say about it. The stark responses made her wonder if she was supposed to enjoy it after she graduated. That sounded like a lot of wasted time to her. Well, the experiences differ, so you'll just have to experience it yourself to form your own opinion. Oh, come on now, stop making that face. Joanne drew the pouting Malia to her side while the two men at the table just enjoyed the view. It's high school, Malia. Not some old spooky traditional sacrifice. Better still, you have Tristan by your side, so whenever you feel bored, just disturb him. Hey guys. Their talk was interrupted by a man carrying a keg with one hand and making his way to their table. DeMarco, what's up, man? Richard shook the hands of the thick-bearded man that came to their table. Well, business been moving, so I guess that's good. Trist, Malia. You guys sure came early. He patted Tristan and Malia on their backs before excusing himself. Let me go drop this in the cellar, and I'll be with you guys. Don't worry, DeMarco. Me and Joanne were thinking about leaving before you came in. Just make sure these two don't get themselves carried away, will ya? Richard said before they both took their leave and left DeMarco to attend his pub. So what have you both been up to? I think it's been a month since we last saw each other. Tristan lifted the keg DeMarco had been carrying with one hand and put it on his shoulders and followed him down to the cellar. With Malia around? Nothing much. We did watch Brett's game last week, but apart from that we've been doing nothing. The lacrosse game? Shame they lost, but Beacon Hill Cyclones is one heck of a tough nut to crack. They've won state championships for the third year in a row now, I think. I got some contacts with some of the players, and they booked some ale for their victory party. He pushed open the door at the end of the cellar and led Tristan to a place where a number of kegs were kept and had him put it down. I heard you're going to Beacon Hills. How about trying out for their lacrosse team? Normally I'm more of a soccer guy, but I guess the home game has its own appeal. Dunno, man. It looks like a place where people blow off steam, and blowing off steam in the middle of normal people doesn't sound like a good idea to me. Compared to Joanne and Richard they met before, Tristan liked DeMarco more because of his easygoing nature despite the hardback he could be once he shifted. Yeah, that doesn't sound nice at all. But I think it'll help in controlling your shift better than the mantra. You need to make contact with other people. That's how most of us learned control. As long as you know they are people at risk if you lose control and you acknowledge that risk, you'll find it easier to keep your urges at bay. Honestly, you have it easier than most because not all of us are lucky to have an imprint like you do. DeMarco led him back to the pub where Malia was cleaning to keep herself occupied. Hey DeMarco, hope we're getting paid? The man looked at the girl for a few seconds with nothing words coming out of his mouth before turning to the boy beside him. Keep your girlfriend on a leash. Wouldn't want her clawing her way into someone's heart. And I mean that in both a figurative and literal way. With that he left the two alone to load up the other kegs out back. I think I'll help serve drinks. And remember to be padash, say the word polite, and I swear to God, I'll gouge out that tongue of yours. That's what I thought. Are you guys sure you want to stay over? I'm asking because I'm concerned as none of you are exactly a people's person. I don't want to receive a call from the sheriff about a party-turned-bloodbath. We're just having fun, DeMarco. Who knows, maybe we'll make some friends before the next year starts. Though she said that, none of the people in the car believed a single word from her mouth. Just help me load this up and let me get out of here. They rolled the kegs over to the house that was booming loudly with music and was welcomed through the back door, as they'd most likely interrupt whatever was going on that two of them didn't want to participate in. They could smell a few intoxicating substances being passed around, but they paid it no mind. Standard teenager stuff. Having gotten his payment, DeMarco left the two of them at the house reeking of drugs, sex, booze and teenage thrills and went back to close up for the day. This is a high school party? I like it. Due to the casual way they dressed, they immediately blended with the rest of the people and made their way to the heart of the party. Tristan, you need to loosen up some, come. She dragged the boy by her side by the hand, ignoring the regretful look on his face, and made way to the dance floor. Yeah. Malia screamed at the top of her voice, along with the crowd of students as the DJ showed them how he earns his pay. Though they were careful not to get inebriated, the steady stream of alcohol had reduced some of their inhibitions. Mostly Malia's, as she had lesser restraints about trying to get wasted at a party. Unlike Malia, who had gotten into a party mood, Tristan couldn't help but notice how out of environment he was. Oh, the party was lit as hell, a testimony to the number of raving teenagers on the dance floor, but he just couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Maybe because he had to keep an eye on Malia and constantly stop her from pummeling some sorry fool who wanted to get frisky with her, not knowing how territorial a coyote could get. So far he'd stopped her from lashing out at up to 8 boys who wanted a feel of her. He just kept an eye on her since this was the first party she's ever attended with just the two of them, so there was no way he would stoop so low and crash in on her fun so soon. He even went an extra mile by going along with whatever she wanted to do. Her fun was that important to him. So far, he partook in whatever was moving around the party except drugs. He had a natural hate for those kinds of substances. A/N. Not me though. But it's bad for the kids, says the government. Somewhere in the middle of the party, Malia had dragged him to an obscure corner for a make-out session to calm her raging nerves, and he had been more than okay to accommodate her urges. Hey handsome, wanna dance? A girl walked sultrily around him and traced his face with her finger. He had lost count of how many times a girl had proposed they dance, and the reply he gave them was always the same. Sorry, no. It didn't help that he could smell how drunk most of them were, and some outright smelled of sex. He also didn't want Malia to beat some poor high school girls. He stopped her hand from going further down, making her shrug and leave. He took out his phone and checked the time, 11:23 p.m. It was close to midnight, and there was no way he was letting the both of them crash the night in the house of some high school jock. He made his way to where Malia was dancing and whispered in her ears. It's almost midnight, let's get going. Unlike the response he expected, Malia held his neck and lifted herself onto his body before taking his lips in a kiss. What's the rush? Even though she felt tipsy, that didn't mean she was fully drunk. She wrapped her legs around him, which made him support her by her rump. He chuckled at her enthusiasm, as normally he wouldn't have a problem, but this party just wasn't his thing. Despite their seemingly unending similarities, they did have their own stark differences that set them apart in more ways than one. One of them being how expressive they are. Malia was a unique blend of both an introvert and extrovert. She had a voice that deserved to be heard, and she wasn't afraid of expressing herself or making her thoughts known, which was something Tristan had trouble in. He had no problems expressing himself to DeMarco and others from the pack, but doing that to strangers just seemed like extra effort. One he couldn't bring himself to exert, not when he was sure none would understand him. Not even Brett, Lori, Jong or Tierney could claim they understood him the most despite spending a lot of time with him, not to the level Malia and their alpha did. It turns out party isn't much of my thing. I'm uncomfortable, Malia. He whined. She huffed at him before patting his shoulder to let her down, which he did. Well, the party did have its good moments, but you're right. It gets stale as time goes on. I think you would have enjoyed it more if the others had tagged along. Tristan let out a groan of thanks that he didn't have to convince her much before she agreed. Well, it was an impromptu idea that sprung itself at the moment, and I didn't want to disturb them. If these kinds of parties are constantly held by high school students, then I don't think it'll be that bad. Malia voiced her honest thoughts as they left the party, only for Tristan to pour cold water on her dream bubble. Keep dreaming. Who the hell would want to throw such a costly party for high schoolers at intervals? It was obvious that the party was organized by the graduating students, and it was for that reason, coupled with the fact that they won state championship again, that they threw such a big party. Well, we can't have them all, can we? They kept walking along the pavements as they made their way home, only accompanied by the few speeding cars that traveled the road at that time. On their way home, Tristan received a text from DeMarco asking if they wanted him to come pick them up midway and give them a ride home from the party as they left their car at home, but Tristan declined since they were enjoying their walk. Hey Trist, do you have anything you want to become after finishing high school? Malia asked out of the blue while skipping on some steps by stepping on them in twos. No idea. He thought for a bit before shrugging as he couldn't come up with anything. I think that's the whole reason for high school. It's meant to give us some perspective on which career to pursue. Why are you asking in the first place? He had known her for as long as he had known himself. Picking up on the signs that something was bothering her needed only a little attention from him. I guess I'm still undecided. Life goals don't really matter that much to you when you're a coyote. It would be pretty dumb for me if I'm the only one of us who doesn't know what they want from life. The way she spoke showed how much thought she had given this particular subject. We're both dumb, Malia. It'll be a stroke of genius on our part if we suddenly made a good life career choice without even knowing what career means. Personally, I wish I could just win a lotto of 100 million and not have to worry about career choices. They weren't delusional to the point that they'd believe Satomi will just continue letting them leech off her for life, so they had to figure out how they wanted to live. How messed up is it that we get hunters coming for our lives at every turn, but there's no monthly allowance for being a supernatural? It is the height of unfairness. Malia growled with frustration. Drinks were supposed to make her not give a shit and not give her a new outlook on life, according to what she heard from DeMarco. Turns out he was just another fat liar. Right? I mean, we're pretty well off given our circumstances, but it wouldn't hurt to have a government-issued monthly stipend to soothe ourselves. Ha ha ha. They both burst out laughing at the image that formed in their head of being paid to laze around. Satomi definitely wouldn't like that. Well, don't think too much about it. If it's something important, then just leave it to me like always. We have a few years to figure out if we are civil class material anyway. Tristan said and nudged at Malia, making her miss her steps. Hey! He laughed at her expense, an expression of carefreeness only a few people he trusted more than anything had seen. That's it, mister. Malia swiped her hands at him only for him to avoid it with practiced movements. She didn't let up and kicked him only for him to step out of its range with a half-turn which turned out not to be a wise move as Malia jumped on his back. I missed my steps, so you're carrying me home. She said and wrapped her hands around his neck while her legs locked themselves around his waist. Tristan only chuckled at her antics and nodded before breaking into a light pace jog. They were supernaturals, yes, doesn't mean their lives have to be complicated, they both thought as they made their way home. Ring ring. Ugh. Two groaning voices reacted to the blaring alarm clock on the bedstand, but none made the effort to turn it off until it gave its second ring. Ring ring. Tristan reached for the alarm clock and bopped it on the head to reset the alarm. He opened his eyes only for tufts of brown hair to obscure part of his vision with some in his mouth. Gently placing the head on his chest on the pillow next to him, he focused back on the alarm clock that for some reason rang earlier than usual. 7:16 a.m. Malia, get up. We're gonna be late for the first day of school. Tristan pushed Malia until she woke up and stared at him with a frown on her face. Why are you so loud in the morning? She looked as if she was going to go back to sleep depending on his answer, but he couldn't have that, so he dragged her off the bed towards the bathroom. We'll be late, Malia, he said and left her standing in the bathroom while he went to brush his teeth. His reminder jolted her awake, and she grumbly went about with preparing herself, knowing that today was the dreaded day. Tristan left her in the bathroom and went to prepare something light, bread toast and orange juice, as they were pretty much spent due to the wolf moon the previous night. They didn't even have the time to properly wolf down their food, pun not intended, so they took it and ate it as they made way to their car. You got everything? Yeah, I think so. Books. You got your books, Malia? He asked again as he failed to receive her answer. Yes, Dad. She replied bluntly in a sarcastic manner that earned her a serious glare from Tristan. I only like you calling me that during special occasions. No time else. Timetable? Pen. Yes, just drive. Tristan drove while keeping the car a few speeds below the community limit. The reason they had slept off like that was due to the wolf moon yesterday, which made Malia's emotions go haywire, so he had spent the better part of when it was up comforting her. They drove into the school only to see it bereft of students except a girl sitting near the gate, which caused them to wince. It was clear how late they were. Looking at the bright side. I don't know the bright side. Malia shook her head as she gave up on what she wanted to say and took her bag and left the car only to find herself stranded and not knowing what to do. Let's ask her. It seems like she's a new student like us. They had no option than asking the girl for directions or resorting to walking through the halls of a foreign school. "Hey, I'm Malia and this here is Tristan. We're new here and I think we're supposed to be making our way to the principal's office." Malia opened up conversation as they gained her attention. "Oh hi, I'm Allison. I'm new too, sorry my mom is calling." They gave her a little privacy to talk with her mother until Tristan turned and looked around the empty parkway. "Is there something wrong, Trist?" Malia asked as she saw him looking towards the school with furrowed brows. "I don't know. I thought I felt a stare in our direction," he said. "It could be one of the students, you know." Their conversation came to a stop as the girl, Allison, became flustered on her call. Everything except a pen. She scrambled through her bag while looking frustrated. "Oh my god. I didn't actually forget a pen. Okay, I gotta go. Love ya." She cut the call and turned to face her fellow new students she had rudely muted, only to find a pen being outstretched to her by Malia. "I think you'll need it more than me," she said with a full-face smile while Tristan looked fed up as he knew she was giving out her only pen, oblivious to Allison. "Thanks. I can't believe I forgot a pen of all things." "Well, you're not the only one who left the house in a hurry." Before they could continue their discussion, the vice principal interrupted them and directed them to their assigned class. The three of them, under the direction of the vice principal, were led to their first class together, English, where they all took the 3 empty provided seats at the end of the class. "Class, these are our new students, Allison Argent, Malia Tate, and Tristan Hayes. Please do your best to make them feel welcomed." He gave a brief introduction to the class about the new intakes before giving the teacher back his class and making his way back to his office. Tristan sat in the middle of the 2 girls, right behind the guy who was most likely a werewolf, probably a recently turned one at that, with how he twitched and winced at every high-pitched sound. He shrugged after he was through with his observations of the boy and focused on the class, or at least tried to, an action perfectly mirrored by Malia, with the only one focusing on class being the new girl, Allison. He tuned out the beta and the entire class and just blankly stared until time passed and the bell rang, jolting him from the meditative trance he had put himself in. He and Malia followed the herd of students and located their lockers with Allison following them, as it seemed their lockers were located in the same row. "So, do you guys have any idea what people do around here?" Allison asked Malia after she placed her books inside her locker. "This is literally my first day in Beacon Hills, so I'm still not up to stuff." Her voice became low and awkward as she got to the end of her sentence. She knew how hard it was being the new student, and not just that, but also being the new girl in town. Tristan, off to the side, remained quiet and left Malia to answer the troubled new girl. Unfortunately, before she could complete her sentence, she was interrupted as another girl shoved her way into their conversation. "Hi, I'm Lydia and that jacket is absolutely killer," she said and rested her body against the locker, blocking Allison's view of Malia and making the girl not knowing how to react as she was torn between calling this Lydia out on her rudeness or responding to her compliment, ultimately deciding on the latter and tried to smooth out any sparks before it blew up. "Oh, my mom is a buyer of, who the hell is this bitch?" The clattering immediately paused and the hallway immediately became quiet as they were entertained with the rarest scene of the new girl ripping Lydia Martin, a fresh one, on her first day. Even Allison was stumped on how to respond to the sudden escalation and found her eyes moving to the boy at her side, who couldn't look more fed up with the current progression. "Hey, excuse me?" Lydia finally turned around and asked with uncertainty as she looked at the girl that had just insulted her in her presence. "Well, you're excused, so scram." And Malia, who couldn't give 2 damns about who this Lydia girl was, didn't hesitate to put her in her place. Lydia wanted to retort, but they were interrupted with the presence of a boy, who immediately made his way to Lydia's side as soon as he saw a commotion forming around his girlfriend. "Can I know what's happening here?" He asked nobody in particular, but expected an answer nonetheless. "Oh, nothing. Just whoever this tramp is not knowing when to barge into someone's conversation." Malia said those words in a tone that suggested that Lydia was dumb enough not to know basic etiquette that even a forest person would know. "She is my girlfriend, so watch it." Jackson Whitmore, captain of the Beacon Hill Cyclones and swim team, felt a bit triggered on seeing a girl he hadn't seen before making a scene out of Lydia, but was conflicted on how to act since any of his actions would directly affect his reputation in school and among his teammates as well. "Just leave her be, Malia. I swear to God you'll give me an aneurysm one of these days." Tristan finally rediscovered his voice and wasted no time in dousing Malia's rising temper with it. It was bad enough that they were not only late but also made a scene on their first day, and he didn't want Malia pushing it to the point that the Lydia girl broke down in tears because Malia was definitely capable of that. Let's check out their lacrosse practice to pass time. He pulled her away from a frozen Lydia and the confused Allison, who hadn't been given the proper chance to accurately react as the situation took a steep dive downhill, only for his arms to be grabbed by the Lydia's boyfriend as he made his way past them. Hold up, I'm not done with you yet. High school was a place where a lot of importance was placed on reputation and merit, and being the person with the most reputation in school, there was a certain height of prestige and respect that Jackson carried himself to, and if he couldn't take his anger out on the girl, the least he could do was take it out on the guy with her. For the nth time since he knew her, Tristan was once again tempted to shout her name in frustration at the top of his voice. Stopping in his tracks, he contemplated what to say to get this guy off his back, but was thankfully saved by the new girl who got in between them, as everyone could tell the situation was getting out of hand. I'm sorry. Malia didn't mean it that way. It was just a misunderstanding, Allison said, hoping that the two of them would just let it go as she was getting concerned at the huge crowd that was already forming in the hallway, which would undoubtedly attract a teacher's attention. And what a day it would be if she got scolded by her teacher on her very first day. It probably won't be anything compared to what she'd hear from her mother if that happened. Lydia looked a bit miffed but did nothing except click her tongue and stomped away while Jackson followed after, since there was nothing more he could do, which prompted the gathering crowd to disperse as the drama was apparently over. I'm so sorry about that. I had no idea it would escalate that quickly. You guys want to get out of here? Allison faced the two of them and apologized, since she had a feeling it was her fault that the previous incident had almost evolved into a fight, which wouldn't have been a good thing to either party involved, and proposed for a change of scene since they were still getting looks for the surrounding students. It's okay. Like I said, we are going to check out their lacrosse practice. For the first time since they met, this was the first time Tristan had talked to her, which kinda took her a little bit by surprise, but she nevertheless nodded in appreciation. They were the only people she knew, and to her initial judgment, they weren't that bad. As they made their way towards the open space the Cyclones used for practice, Allison started up the conversation. So, lacrosse. This time it was the less irritated Malia that answered her. Yeah, it's like the next big thing in Beacon Hills. Lacrosse here is the main sports played, different from the usual high school football and basketball you've probably grown used to, she explained. Allison had a look of understanding as she heard Malia's words and inquired further. I see. Are we any good? If winning state's championship a couple times in a row consequently matches your definition of good, then I think they are quite good. They? She asked at the wording Malia used only for the girl to shrug, as if she could be more bothered. It's not like I care for their little stick game. I'm only here because he wanted to check it out. Malia pointed at Tristan, which once again reminded Allison of his presence. Oh, I see. So, what's his deal? I noticed he doesn't talk that much, and I doubt it's something as stupid as being awkward around people. Allison glanced at Tristan, who didn't even show any reaction towards her blatantly pointing him out. Instead of answering like she had been doing, Malia turned towards Tristan with an expression that looked as if Allison's question was something she too had been worrying about. Under the two inquisitive stares of the girls, Tristan knew that though he could just ignore her, it wasn't a question that made him think too much for an answer, since it was something a lot of people had asked him, and his answer was always the same thing, sometimes in different contexts. You guys looked very immersed in your conversation, so I decided not to speak. A half-lie that no one could point out, maybe except Malia, and based on the looks she was giving him, even Allison too. I know a deflective lie when I see one. You don't look socially awkward and you're pretty fit, depicting your athletic strength, so it's got to be something else. Come on, tell me. Allison prodded him further. She didn't know why, but she was very natural when she was talking with them, since none of them made an effort put on any mask when talking. From the limited time and observations she had done, even during class, the only thing she could tell was that Malia was very blunt in the way she talked. It was as if consideration was never a part of her speech, so she was naturally curious about Tristan's tick. Call her intruding, but she felt that he two of them were quite the interesting people pair, and that only meant one thing: gossip. Tristan looked at her as they made their way up the bleachers, and thought of whether she'll finally let it rest if he answered her. It's nothing really. It's just that conversations can sometimes be a bore to indulge in if you're not interested in it or you are talking to a stranger. And no, I'm not alluding to being a loner or any such tendencies. He tried to keep his words as articulate as possible, not to create a misunderstanding. In a different column of the bleachers, the girl they met earlier saw them coming in and scowled in irritation, and forcefully turned her head to focus on the opening warm-up game of the year. Back to Tristan's circle, Allison almost pumped her hand in a way that would have made her seem quirky due to Tristan's response. Her initial fears about moving to a new place, and one so far away from the city, was that she was afraid of the questions and the talks behind her back should she fail to fit in, and being able to meet a pair of free-minded people like those two was a pure stroke of luck. "Oh? So our conversation was boring?" she asked. "No. And..." She knew she was being pushy since she'd only known them for a few hours, but she had a feeling that neither would hesitate to call her out if she ever got on their nerves. "You were talking to Malia." Tristan's answer made her pause as she realized that she had indeed only been talking to Malia since they first met, but that wasn't a deterrent for not joining a conversation if you wanted to. "You guys are weird." She let that out unintentionally and immediately covered her mouth as she registered how rude the words she said sounded. "Well, you're not entirely wrong about that." They both regarded it with nonchalance, as if that was least offensive word she could have said. "Your guys aren't offended?" she asked just to be sure. "That's the least worst thing you could have said. And you're not supposed to call someone weird when you have a weird name like Argent. What language is that anyway?" "Italian," Malia asked. "It's my family name and it's French." So far, the first day of school had been quite different than what any of them expected, but they just rolled with it. "We just moved from San Francisco since my dad got a contract and suggested we all move together to Beacon Hills." Allison gave a brief rundown of the reason why she found herself in Beacon Hills. She had gotten quite the gist about them in a general sense. Malia was raw, in the most direct way possible. It was a surprise for her to see a girl with Malia's personality, and unlike what most might think, she loved the headstrong attitude which could be attributed to the tough personality of her family. Tristan, on the other hand, unlike her first impression of him, was quite the conversationalist, but he preferred if it was kept short and concise. He was the harder one to understand. She wanted to chalk it up to edginess brought by puberty, but it didn't seem forced or something he couldn't control. "You said you've moved around quite a few times in the past few years. What exactly does your dad do?" Tristan asked. "He sells guns to local law enforcement," she said casually, as if it was the most normal thing for a parent to do. "The game's about to start." Malia's reminder brought back their focus to the reason why they were here in the first place. "Tristan." Malia's nose twitched as she caught a whiff of one of the players' smell and tapped Tristan to see if he caught it too, only to see him nod. It wasn't the fact that they met a werewolf that was surprising, since they've met a few, even those who weren't a part of their pack, but the fact that he didn't even have the basics down. It was apparent to anyone who paid a little observation that he was a newly turned werewolf. The reason they were able to pick up on his status was because of the basic lack of control of his heightened and erratic animalistic emotions that made him smell like an animal. And like the current scenario was foretelling, leaving a newly turned werewolf in a field of hyper-teens to play a strenuous game was just goading him to lose control. For them, though, it was that they were finally getting to see something fun to balance their quite average day. "Is that?" Allison pointed at a player with a number 37 foot emblazoned on his shirt. "Oh, him? That's supposedly their captain. Completely forgot what his name was." Malia just waved it off and watched as the werewolf was put in the goalie position, which turned out to be the best option in order to prevent him from lashing out in the middle of the day, much to her chagrin. "The goalie's quite good," Allison remarked as she watched him save all the balls shot at the goal with a clean streak. The goalie managed to catch all the balls shot, including that of the team captain, which made the audience erupt in a cheer. The day went by with Malia and Tristan leaving as soon as the bell rang, while Allison waited for her dad to come pick her up. "What do you mean a body was found in the woods?" Tristan asked Jiang, as the latter had called to keep him updated on what he had heard. "The sheriff's station apparently got called when some dudes found a half-body. I haven't heard anything else, but I know they did a search yesterday, but I don't think they found the other part." "Got it. No going into the woods," was Tristan's sarcastic reply. He didn't see the reason why he had to know about some poor person who got halved, even if they knew it was most likely the work of a supernatural. "Seriously, man, you gotta watch your backs. Joanne even told me she heard an alpha's howl yesterday, so it can't be just a coincidence. People dying to animal attacks is already bad, and adding a bloodthirsty alpha is something that no one wants. Don't worry. We don't have any reason to seek out an alpha for their sporadic killings. Tristan wasn't that worried because he knew there were still some alphas hiding in Beacon Hills, and surely they'd interfere if one of them got too out of line. Yeah. I'll tell the others the news if they haven't gotten it yet. Ending the call there, he turned to Malia, who was sitting on the countertop listening to the call with legs swinging. You don't think it's a coincidence, do you? The meaning of his question was clear to her. A new beta who probably doesn't know what's happening to him, and then Joanne confirming that she heard an alpha's call during the Wolf Moon yesterday? It's too aligned for it to be a coincidence. Malia voiced her thoughts. As far as they know, the very few alphas who were still in Beacon Hills had gone recluse since the hail accident that they didn't even try and sire new betas, only for some killings to spring up and all of a sudden there's news of an alpha and then the beta in school. There had been no killings for the past few weeks, so they thought that whatever beef was going on had been squashed, but the recent body the cops found threw all that away. Thought so too. I even tried sensing for any other werewolf around who could be keeping an eye on McCall, but there were none. The reason they put in this much thought into the recent happenings in Beacon Hills was for the sole fact that they would be able to avoid any complicated situations that may arise in the occasion that they crossed path with another alpha and their pack, since their own alpha was mostly a recluse and hardly ever in Beacon Hills. The last thing they needed was getting into a territorial war against any newly sprung-up residing pack in Beacon County. So what are we gonna do? We could maybe tell that guy in class. McCall. Whatever his name is, to schedule or maybe pass a message to his alpha. Malia suggested. If Satomi was here, then none of them would have bothered with any of this, as she would have taken care of it like the mama hen she was. But unfortunately she wasn't. Tristan frowned as he pondered on Malia's words. I don't think that's such a good idea. At Tristan's words, Malia spread her arms wide, not understanding why he would say that. And why not? We'll just nip everything in the bud once we get our message across, and if they are the ones doing the killings, then we might be able to figure out their motive, and also know whether more packs are migrating to Beacon Hills. That's 1, 2, 3. 3 stones with one bird. Releasing a sigh at her reasoning, which was understandable and normally would be the ideal action to take, he nevertheless made his point. First of all, that analogy is flipped. Secondly would be us stepping out of our line by a few margin steps. Just hear me out. He paused her before she could interrupt his words. Despite whatever initial impressions we might leave on others, never forget that we are a Buddhist pack, and as such we don't strike until violence is our only way out. Compared to Beacon Hills in general, Beacon County is quite small, which means that territorial supernaturals are less likely to get actively involved, and we haven't heard anything about them hunting other supernaturals, so like everyone else, we'll play the ignorant role and observe from the sidelines. After all, it must be quite serious if even the alpha is getting involved. The reason he pressed down on the option of not involving themselves was because he was sure that Satomi was already aware of what was happening here in Beacon County, and since she hasn't said anything or given any directives, it was expected of them to continue as they were doing, which was refraining themselves from everything happening as much as they could. It would be an entirely different thing if they were the ones being approached. Ugh. This is the most interesting thing that's ever happened in my life, but I guess you're right. What was she to do when everyone's advice was the same? In a tinted frame SUV, a man and a teenage girl could be seen having a normal discussion with each other as the man drove. Well, it was an interesting first day, all things given, maybe except for some slight hiccups. Allison told her father as he drove her home. Hiccups? He asked. Well, it's one of those unavoidable things between teenagers. I wasn't the only new student, so it wasn't that hard trying to blend in, and I made some friends. She expertly avoided talking about the incident between Malia and Lydia that would have most likely gotten them called to the principal's office on the first day. Christopher Argent, Allison's father, had a public image of a legal weapons dealer, and while he was every bit as strict as he looked, the tenderness he showed to his daughter was obvious to everyone who observed their relationship, making him come across as overprotective. Hearing his daughter's recap of what happened on the first day at her new school, he nodded his head, glad that at least she wasn't as depressed as she was when he had informed her of their relocation to Beacon Hills. Well, I'm happy you made friends on your first day. Remember that you can talk to either me or your mother if you're facing any problems adapting. He reminded her, since he more than anyone was fully aware of how closed off she was to new people, since they always seemed to be moving around every time. I know, Dad. Besides, who would want to mess with a new girl whose dad sells weapons? She chuckled at the image that formed in her head, which her father also seemed to get as he too chuckled. He pulled over to the front of their house and let her get out. "I have a few errands to run, so tell your mom I probably won't be back until dinner. You can go pick your car up later or have it be brought to the house if you want." Saying that, he drove off to attend to one of the business reasons that brought him back to Beacon Hills. Allison entered her house and was greeted by her mother, who was in the middle of unboxing a few packages. "Allison, dear. How was your first day?" "It was great, Mom," she replied. "Better than I honestly expected." Hearing that, her mother smiled in relief. "That's good to hear. So, did you at least make a friend on your first day?" she asked, not minding the eye roll her daughter made as she sauntered to the fridge to dehydrate. Allison grabbed a bottle of water and drank it halfway before answering her mother. "Yes, I did. They are also like me, new students. Oh, Dad said my car arrived and I can go pick it up later, and also to tell you that he'll probably be running a little late." Applying the same tactic as she did with her father, she successfully diverted her mother's attention from further inquiring how her first day went. "I'll go freshen up before going to pick up the car." She headed straight to her room before her mother started another round of questioning. Today was a very good day for her. At least she had company throughout the day, and since she already had some semblance of acquaintance with Malia and Tristan, it prevented the whole repeating scenario of moving along with the flow when other girls started talking to her and she had to tell them why she moved and all those other little stuffs that girls were interested in. Speaking of Malia and Tristan, she wondered what kind of relationship they had. It was hard to figure out as she first thought they were siblings only to find out their different names, and then she thought maybe they were dating given how close they were, but then they lived together so it couldn't be that. Well, she'll just ask tomorrow. Tristan Hayes POV, Tristan Hay. Allison called out to me after class and skipped towards me, which made me slow my pace for her to keep up. I was on my way to meet up with Malia as our class schedules were different, which actually concerned me a little. Just like me, she was not a favorite of learning, or simply sucked at it, and was prone to become quite aggressively agitated when something kept frustrating her. "Are you heading somewhere?" she asked me as we walked together. Compared to how reserved she was a little bit yesterday, she seems to have a lot more skips in her steps today. I nodded. "Malia." My ears caught the grating sound of metal, and given the direction it was coming from, it looks like I was right to be worried. "I see. Well, not all our classes are the same, so it's unavoidable," she said and put on a thinking expression. "Apart from the obvious love of lacrosse, what do you guys do for fun around here?" We continued walking down the hallway until we came to the door of the female restroom, which caused a confused look to mar her pale face. "I believe you can find whatever fun activity you are looking for in Beacon Hills. You'll only need people to enjoy it with you if you're the friend group type." I finally answered her question, but the expression on her face only told me that she had more brewing up in her head. Looking between the female restroom and me for a few seconds before she slowly nodded. Why are we in front of the female's restroom?" She looked a bit awkward, wary even, as she asked that, and I could tell what was probably going through her head. Fortunately for me, none were correct. "We're waiting for Malia." It was funny how her entire face changed at the realization. "Oh. MHM. Oh God." She groaned as an embarrassed look settled on her face at the implication that I knew her train of thoughts. "I didn't. I mean, it's not. I totally understand. Don't worry about it." She let out a breath of relief and composed herself after her previous blunder. "How do you even know she's in there?" I only shrugged at her question without answering, and thankfully didn't need to say anything as Malia finally came out of the restroom and saw the both of us. "I hate math." Those were the very first words that left her mouth. I nodded as I could reciprocate what she most likely felt. Everything apart from the basic function and application of numbers made no sense whatsoever. "So you both hate math? That's actually not surprising. Well, I'm quite good at it, so I think I can help you guys out if you run into some problems," Allison offered, and I just shook my head at the trap she just dug herself, because there was no way would want to do her assignments if she had someone like Allison around. "Seriously?" Malia asked, which prompted an earnest nod from Allison. "You, Allison, just became my best friend." She became flattered, unknowing of the trouble she just heaped upon herself, as she smiled in earnest appreciation. We found ourselves back in the lacrosse field because I was interested in watching McCall and also a bit apprehensive about what might happen if he played because tonight was a full moon, and since he was just recently turned, It will also be his first full moon experience. I saw McCall getting ready to get into the game only for someone, Stalinsky, probably his friend, to run up to him and started telling him something which made me strain my senses. Just hold on, okay? I overheard my dad on the phone. He started despite seeing the impatient look on McCall's face. The fiber analysis came back from the lab in LA. They found animal hairs on the body from the woods. Now wasn't this interesting? This all but confirms everything. But unfortunately for me, McCall wasn't interested in the conversation and was in a hurry to play the game. Styles, I gotta go. Earth to Tristan. I turned to the girls beside me as I heard my name being called. You've been staring at the players quite intently. I don't think they'll be opposed to you trying out, you know. Allison said, but I just shook my head in denial. Playing the game would be easy for me due to my supernatural physique, but I don't have the dedication the players had. It's not that. I was just figuring something out. Well, Allison here was asking me about fun things to do, and I don't think she's down for some bar brawling. Malia's words caused Allison to give her a look, one filled with skepticism and uncertainty. What? It really gets your blood pumping. Malia defended her claim, but Allison wasn't buying it. MHM. She shook her head vigorously and looked at me. At least tell me you know something that doesn't involve violence. I knew some outdoor activities, but I didn't know the ones girls would like. Normal girls. I think I overheard something like a party being held at her place. Supposed to be the whole vibe check thing. I said, pointing at Lydia. Oh, the bitch from yesterday. I nodded at her words. Come on, guys. I don't think she's that bad. It was probably just a misunderstanding that blew out of proportions. You know, normal girl stuff. Allison tried raising a defense only to be met with a look from Malia. Wait. Apart from Tristan here, do you even know other people? She asked. Of course I do. What do you take me for? An animal. Quite the apt analogy there, Malia. Girls. Yes. HMMN. And pray tell, how often do you hang out with just girls? Well, I don't think we've ever hung out. They're more like an extended family actually, so it's just a matter of always call if you need me type thing. Malia replied. That was basically what our pack was, so it made sense to describe them as an extended family. Wait, family. Malia nodded, which caused another groan to escape Allison's mouth. So basically you don't have any other friends outside of your family, is that right? She asked after some hesitation, and even I was starting to see what she was gunning at. No. And you've been living with Tristan since? She was holding her head in both her arms at this point. Since we were kids. Malia didn't seem to understand what was wrong with Allison, but she could tell something was wrong with the almost pale petite girl. At that last utterance, Allison looked at me with grievance in her eyes as if I made some kind of mistake. I blame you. Was the next thing that came out of her mouth. Okay, stop going through corners and tell me what's up with all the questions. Malia asked Allison, and it might probably just be me, but I think there was an increase in level of compassion as she took Malia's hands into hers. Family is the most important thing, no denying that, but you still need to make your own friends, Malia. Allison said, and given the off face Malia made, she finally understood. But the thing was, Allison was wrong, but it wasn't her fault. We were from different parts of the same world, and even if we made friends, it would never be something genuine if the person was ignorant of what we truly are, and it'll never mean that much to us. Even our current relationship with Allison was bound to fade away sooner, probably before the year ends, and it wouldn't mean that much to us. It also doesn't help that the person you are closest to is your best friend/brother. We need to, you know what? We are hanging out tonight. Allison got into some kind of zone, and Malia, being the poor victim, just got pulled along. And she also somehow confused my relationship with Malia. Malia shrugged, not bothered by Allison's words. Well, I'm cool with hanging out, but the problem is the difference in tastes. She pointed out. We can work on that later, but we're going to the party tonight. Allison said. Are you sure that Lydia won't be a prissy bitch about it if we turned up to her party uninvited? She might, but it's also a way to smooth out whatever grievances she might have. Allison offered a peaceful resolution only for Malia to snort. Yeah, that's all you. She tries any of that stupid queen bee shit on me, then I'm zipping her up. It wasn't the first time Malia's hated someone at first sight, so I wasn't that surprised. Queen B? Allison asked, but none of us gave her any answer. I was listening to their conversation while watching the game until something caught my attention. I wasn't the one with the best smell, but I could identify a werewolf if they were near me. I focused on my senses, but it was not here in the stands, nor any of the players. I turned to look at the surrounding forest around the field, and I was sure someone had been there, watching, but he left. Maybe McCall's alpha, or another beta keeping an eye out for him probably. Tristan, you're coming to the party, right? Allison asked, but I shook my head. Parties are not my thing. They really weren't, so this wasn't a lie. There was no reason for me to be there when it was clear that I'll only be getting in the middle of them having fun, and I also didn't have any worries about Malia since she wasn't affected by the full moon. Yesterday's wolf moon had been different because she'd woken up in the middle of the night due to a nightmare with there being a wolf moon and all kinda threw her emotions all over the place. A wolf moon was the first moon after Yule, or the first moon of the year, and it symbolized a spiritual connection between an alpha and their pack. The wolves would usually howl at the moon to signify a hunt, mark their territories, or call out to other pack members. The wolf moon, however, is a time of personal reflection and seeing your true self, and Malia decided to sleep through it. Not that I was surprised. I had been in meditation when she started acting out and had to put her under control. Seriously, you guys need to go out and make at least a few friends. So you're going to spend the night on your own while your classmates are probably out having fun? Allison asked, and now I was getting mixed vibes from her. What? Nothing. It's just that my image of you is constantly changing. I answered. Sometimes she gave you this shy feeling, and other times she was almost as blunt as Malia, but with a polite undertone. She sometimes makes me think she's a sheltered girl who tries not to mix much with wrong people, and at other times, she's just this. Something about her makes me want to sink my fangs into her neck. Thoughts like these sometimes flash through my head at random, whenever she's talking or expressing herself. Maybe she's not the weird one, maybe we are, and she's just a normal teenager unlike us. So who's going to take us to the party? She asked, which prompted a deadpan from me. You have a car. I said. We might get a little tipsy, and I don't drive with a light head. And no, I'm not letting Malia drive either. She retorted. Then have someone, your dad or an Uber, come pick you up. I told her. I'm not calling my dad to come pick us up at a high school party, and really? 2 drunken high school girls in an Uber. She asked as if what I said didn't make sense. This is not San Francisco or wherever she's from, so I don't know what's up with her Uber experience, but this is Beacon Hills. Nothing ever happens in Beacon Hills. Rarely ever happens. What do you want from me, Allison? I asked as I got up from the bench and strapped my bag. Drive us. And besides, my dad would be less snoopy if he knew someone was taking me to a party and bringing me back rather than me going on my own. It's the second day of school after all. She pleaded. Well, it's not like you're doing anything at home anyway. Malia quipped at the side. Remind me again why I have to do this. Tristan asked Malia, who stood in front of the wardrobe searching for clothes to wear in just her panties and bra. Because, Tristan, it's quite normal for high school students to attend parties every once in a while, according to Allison. Malia quoted. Tristan rolled his eyes and asked. And how does that correlate with me going to a party? Hearing this, Malia sighed and turned around with her hands on her waist. Come on, Tristan. We both know I couldn't care less about some high school party or how high school students move on with their lives in general. But this is the first time since forever that I'm hanging out with someone who is not from our pack, and not you. Her face gained a soft look and a wistful smile stretched her lips. She's the first friend either of us have made, and I think she's fun in her own boring way. She further added. When all was said about her character and violent tendencies, all that was left to remember was that she was just a 16-year-old girl who's only lived less than 12 years of her life due to being trapped as a coyote for over 5 years due to an accident that she had no control over. The strong exterior and the bluntness was a way for her to protect herself with the only way she knew of. She was not as girlish as other girls were, which was something she had a natural dislike towards, and putting on masks was not something she could do. So the version of Malia you got to know was the same version everyone got, even Satomi, even Tristan. The only difference was that he knew her better than anyone ever would. After all, he had been there with her the longest. She walked forward and sat at the edge of the bed and took his hand in hers. And it's not just for me. She intertwined her fingers with his. I want us to enjoy high school as best we can. We'll only live through it once after all. I am enjoying it though. Tristan said. It's just the second day. I'll gradually ease into it. And then her eyes gained something that was rarely ever there. Concern. I've seen the way you look at them, Trist. Mostly Allison. I know how hard you're struggling not to mistakenly kill someone, so I can't actually fault you for keeping distance. Tristan let out a morbid chuckle. It's not as hard as it seems, and I've gotten pretty good at it after all this time. Then show me. She softly said. At her words, Tristan's eyes went from brown to an azure blue, and the veins around his eyes grew darker until the sockets became a dark shadow with a pair of blue irises. Seeing his transformation, she drew him close and placed his hands around her waist while her hands went over his neck as she rested her head on his shoulders. Go ahead. You can never hurt me. You're not strong enough to. She nuzzled deeper and tightened the grip of her hands around his head, bringing his fangs closer to her exposed neck, where she could already feel his hot breath. A Prius pulled up to the front of a house that was situated in a nicely structured neighborhood. Are you sure this is where she lives? Tristan asked for clarifications, since the place looked quite loaded. I guess selling guns must be some good money if they can afford this while moving around all the time. Malia commented as she looked at the house. Maybe we could be some kind of weapons dealer when we get older. Tristan hummed in agreement before checking his watch. I'm more of a medieval weapon guy, but I think we can pull it off. Let's just get this over with. He opened the door and stepped out of the car before walking to the front door with Malia in tow. Ding dong. Tristan wore a simple fading green hoodie with the white shirt he wore underneath tucking out below the waist hem and over the chest area while pairing it up with a pair of black trousers. Malia, on the other hand, wore a beige jacket over a white crop top and jean pants. Coming. They heard the voice of a woman scream out from inside and waited a few seconds for it to be opened by an elderly woman with short red hair and a raised brow. Hello. How can I help you? She asked with a soft smile on her face. She didn't tell you? Tristan asked only to see her confusion rising. Allison. We came to pick her up for a party at a classmate's. Hearing that, her face lit up in realization as she regarded the two students, presumably friends of Allison, with a welcome. Oh, sorry about that. I'm Allison's mother, but you can just call me Mrs. Argent. She mentioned a party but didn't say anything about anyone coming to pick her up. Tristan's face didn't show any emotion at Allison's blunder, but he nevertheless responded to her mother. I see. I'm Tristan, by the way, and this is Malia. She nodded at both of them and ushered them in. Well, come on in. I think she's still getting ready, so you can wait for her in the living room. Oh, we don't want to impose. Nonsense. You can tell me all about yourselves in the meantime. She waved off their concern and opened the door wider with a soft smile on her face. Though he didn't say anything, Tristan was sure as hell that had he been the only one here, she wouldn't have let him in the house but would have grilled him at the door. They both went in and had to take a step back to appreciate the interior, which had a mix between luxury and homely. Definitely rich. They both thought. Do you guys want anything? Drinks? No, thank you. Water will be fine. Malia answered, which sent the woman to the fridge to grab a can and some glass. Malia nodded as Allison's mother went out of sight. Yup. They're definitely doing something shady. Tristan didn't affirm or deny it, but instead asked why she thought so. Just a feeling. Malia shrugged. Maybe they sell weapons on the black market too. Street gangs, or something similar. I don't know, but it just looks too clean. She stated. Before Tristan could answer, Mrs. Argent reappeared with 2 glasses of water and set it before them before taking the opposite chair. She stared at them with the same faint smile on her lips and only began her questioning after they've taken the first sip. So tell me, how did both of you meet my daughter? She asked a genuine question in pure curiosity, as Allison never made mention about the friend she made. Malia was the one who answered her, so that Tristan wouldn't have to talk too much. We met on the first day. We just started Beacon Hills like her, so being new students and all. Hearing that, Mrs. Argent nodded her head in perfect understanding before asking her next question. What about the two of you? How long have both of you known each other? The reason she asked this was because of the way they both arrived together and were sitting so close to each other. Tristan and I have known each other for a few years, Malia said, and Mrs. Argent immediately got the gist of everything, and was about to lay off the question for the night until Malia continued. He's my boyfriend. Mrs. Argent was surprised for a bit, but nodded in perfect understanding, and even smiled in approval. It wasn't every day you see a pair of couples, even one so young, be in a relationship for a few years, and the way Malia said it clued her in that they might have been friends before they started dating. Oh, I see. Please take care of Allison for me. Absolutely. Malia nodded in assurance, which made Mrs. Argent look favorably upon the girl more. Mom. Allison called out from the stairs. Dear, your friends are waiting for you. Her mom informed her and left the two of them alone to attend to her own stuff as Allison rushed down. Allison came down wearing a white blouse under a black blazer with jean pants and smiled at both of them. Why didn't you call to say you were already here? She asked as she made her way towards them with an exasperated expression on her face. They both shrugged instead of answering her, and she dropped it for a more important one. Hope my mom didn't ask you too many questions? Allison. Her mom's voice called out with a chiding tone to it, indicating that she heard what her daughter said. She did. She asked 4 questions. Malia said, which stumped Allison for a moment, only for her to be alarmed and embarrassed as she knew that her mom likely heard what the dense girl with no sense for tact said. Please, let's just go. She knew it was a bad choice letting them meet her parents this early on, but it was out of her power. The McCall's house, Scott McCall, is the very definition of a normal high school teenage boy. Born the only son of a divorced single mom whose job was an overworked nurse at the Beacon Hills Memorial Hospital, and an abusive drunk of a father who worked for the feds. Scott McCall was the very definition of a challenged, normal high school teenage boy. Scott laid on his bed while his mind continued sifting through all the possibilities that, though far-fetched, his best friend Stiles gave him. He had been quite angry at Stiles way more than he should when Stiles had confronted him and suggested that he didn't play the game come Saturday. He had every right to react the way he did because he had just made first line and Stiles had the gall to say that he could very well kill somebody, and the only way to prevent that was to not play the game. Even merely thinking about it now still made him angry. Oh my God. What's happening to me? Scott whimpered with his right hand over his face. Thinking back now that his mind wasn't being clouded by upping Jackson and punching Stiles across the face, he realized that everything started after that wolf bit him 2 nights ago. He had been brimming with energy all day that lacrosse didn't even take that much out of him after practice, which it should considering he was asthmatic. He let out a depressed chuckle at that thought. Well, not anymore. His asthma had miraculously disappeared ever since that night, and not only that, his senses had also improved. He could smell everything inside his class, and he could even pinpoint where each smell was coming from if he focused. Lydia's expensive perfume, Stiles' deodorant and mint mojito in his pockets, the new girls, Allison's lavender and the scent of leaves from Malia. It was only from the boy named Tristan that he was having trouble picking up a smell on. His hearing had also improved that he could even hear hushed conversations in the hallway despite being in class, and even the other class teacher teaching. Not to mention waking up in an animal's cave in the middle of the freaking woods this morning. You couldn't just chalk something like that up to regular sleepwalking. No matter how he looked at it, this was in no way normal. Was he going to die? Was Stiles right? Was he really some werewolf? Could he kill someone? If he played on Saturday, would he lose control and rip out someone's neck? Coach? Jackson? Danny? Stiles? His mom? No. It's not my fault. He could cry. He was just a normal teenage boy who dreamed of making first line before all this started happening. It was that goddamned wolf's fault. Why did it have to bite him? Besides, it wasn't his idea to go to the woods that night. It was Stiles. Was it Stiles' fault? It had to be someone's fault, and that someone had to be held responsible. Unknowingly, his normal brown eyes glowed a bright gold and his ears started creeping out. Scott. He didn't hear the voice of someone calling him as his mind and thoughts became clouded. He rolled on his bed as his body felt extremely uncomfortable that he threw away his blankets and fell off the bed. Scott, open up. Let me help. Someone banged on the door, but his entire focus was hazed that all he wanted to do was vent, but he didn't know how to. The banging on his door continued, but it was drowned in everything else he was currently feeling. He felt restricted. The room was uncomfortable. He picked himself up off the floor with great effort and used the windowsill to pull himself up as vertigo overrode his perception acuity. He managed to get up his feet only for him to see a transparent reflection of himself on his window. Glowing golden eyes, overgrown sideburns, elongated ears, and fangs. Honest-to-goodness predatory fangs. He brought up a pair of shaky hands to feel his face only for him to catch sight of his hands, more specifically the claws that had extended out to a lethal height. A monster. That was the first thing that came to his mind as he took in his appearance that resembled something between a human and a bloodthirsty wild predator. He shook on his feet to the point that they felt too weak to hold his body up. His focus was momentarily shifted to the banging door. "Scott, open the damn door or I'm breaking it." Worry and panic laced Styles' voice that Scott moved on instinct to get the door, but saw his hands that had claws and then turned a bit to once again see his current look. "Scott, just freaking listen to me please. I'll get you through this, I swear. Please, just please, open the door and let me in, Scott." Styles hit the door softly this time and pleaded with a shaky voice. Scott took in a deep breath and contemplated answering, but at that moment, the small pool of clouds that covered a part of the moon floated away and made the full clear moon bathe Scott in his luminescent light. As if reacting to his direct exposure to moonlight, his semi-calm mind was once again flooded with high unfettered emotions that he found hard to process due to how overwhelming they were, which left him with only one way to react to them: instinct. Bestial instinct. His fangs and claws grew a few millimeters while his face distorted and scrunched up to form a wild expression that complemented his golden eyes, fangs, facial hairs, and ears. He felt unbearably hot, so he ripped off the sweater he wore and looked once more at the moon, which seemed to call him. With the last bit of rationality in his eyes that faded the very next moment, he pushed himself off the window of his room that was on the second floor and landed on all fours like an animal. He looked up and saw a pair of blue eyes that triggered danger instincts he never knew he had looking at him from a distance before it moved away at inhuman speeds, which prompted Scott to follow despite not knowing why. Up in Scott's bedroom, the door was forcefully pushed open by Styles, who rushed in with a bag on his back as he quickly surveyed the room and noticed Scott's apparent presence or lack thereof before noticing the opened window and shredded shirt near it, which made his worry become more pronounced. He looked through the window and apart from the indentation on the soil from Scott's deducted landing, he had nothing else. Freaking hell. He cursed in anger and rushed out of the room to get his car and look for his best friend. Meanwhile, with Scott, he pursued the running man into the woods, not losing a trail of him thanks to his improved enhanced vision acuity and night vision. At this moment, the young innocent former asthmatic lacrosse player was gone, and in his place was a beast of untamed emotions leaking through on an auspicious night like that of a full moon. He got closer to his prey as their speed decreased, and with the achievement of a successful hunt in sight, he followed his instincts and lunged at the man with claws at the ready and fangs ready to tear his flesh apart, only for him to be caught midair and slammed against the ground in an impressive show of speed and strength. "Knock out of it, Scott." A young man pinned the wild teenage boy on the ground and restrained most of his wild movements. "Stop. You're going to get yourself killed if you can't rein in your emotions." Derek Hale, the young man who held the young beta down, and also the younger brother to the girl whose body was found in the woods, and also a werewolf, cursed as his hearing picked up hasty movements in the forest. Shit, hunters. They just had to be patrolling on a full moon. He drew the flailing Scott off the ground and feeling the hunters hurrying towards them, he contemplated his choices. First of all, if he left the boy to himself, it wasn't exactly guaranteed that they would let him live, not with the sporadic animal killings going on recently, and the boy didn't help his case as he was rabid. Secondly, he needed the boy as the boy was clearly a recently turned beta, and very soon whoever sired him would likely put out a call for a hunt and wanted to meet the alpha who likely killed his sister. In other words, he needed the boy in his reach more than in the scope of the hunters. Seeing he was out of options and they were dangerously near, he resorted to the most practical option that would benefit their situation. "You better thank me later, kid." Not caring for Scott's threatening growls and the few scratches he gave him, he held one of Scott's hands and applied a considerable amount of force. Snap. Arg. Scott's glowing eyes turned back to their normal brown as clarity returned to him with the pain of having his arm forcefully broken, though he still maintained a partial transformation. There. I see them. Seeing their close proximity with the hunters, Derek turned to the whining Scott. "Run now." He dragged him by the hand to give him a tug, making the still out of it Scott to narrowly escape an arrow from skewering through him. The missed arrow brought Scott back to focus as his body automatically activated his flight response, making him follow Derek, unconsciously, only for his legs to go faster as an arrow swooshed past him and impacted a tree, which resulted in a small explosion that he couldn't bring himself to focus on. Run faster, damn it. Derek barked and increased his speed, since he was purposely slowing down to keep Scott in his range, but now they needed to lose the pursuing hunters. Scott didn't react to Derek's rebuke in any way except pushing his legs to take him out of this damned forest of death faster. Who the hell hunts people with bow and arrows in the middle of the night? He cried inwardly. Thankfully for them, the hunters slowed down their pursuit as the two werewolves made their way deeper into the woods, a natural habitat for any wild predator. They continued running for a while to make sure they had lost the group of hunters before they started slowing down to catch their breaths. Scott crashed into the ground as the physical and mental fatigue of everything that had happened in the last hour hit him with full clarity. What the hell is this? Why are there people trying to kill me? His frustration bled out and morphed into fear and then anger. He was just a normal 16-year-old wet-behind-the-ears high school sophomore, and he almost lost his life in just one night to some strange arrow shooting group that just opened fire without even asking any questions. Derek supported himself against a tree as he released measured breaths as opposed to Scott's panic-fueled large gulps. Hunters, Derek said. The kind that have been hunting us for centuries. Hearing Derek's words and knowing what the us implied, he flipped at the man a few years older than him, righteously vexed. Us? You mean you? You did this to me. Is it really so bad, Scott? That you can see better? Hear more clearly? Move faster than any human could ever hope. You've been given something most people would kill for. He stared intently at Scott to get his point across. The bite is a gift. Scott didn't hesitate to refute his words. I don't want it. You will. And you're going to need me if you want to learn how to control it. He bent down to Scott's eye level and put a hand on his shoulder and squeezed it reassuringly in a way that suggested no turning back. So you and me, Scott? We're brothers now. He then turned around and left Scott, who slumped further into the ground with a long sigh as profound exhaustion over the recent events and widened worldview washed over him. Scott trudged along the side of the road in only his pajama pants in the early hours of morning, after he had spent hours maneuvering through the forest with caution in order not to come across the hunters and risk death by a bow just hours after he managed to escape. An old sky blue Jeep pulled over next to Scott and drew his attention to see his best friend's face light up in relief. Stiles kicked the door open and urged Scott to get in before handing him a jacket, since the after-winter mornings were still cold. You good there, buddy? Stiles asked in concern, seeing his best friend's defeated look as he cushioned his neck on the headrest and stared unblinkingly ahead. I'm a werewolf. Scott muttered blandly. I know. How freaking cool is that, am I right? Stiles' hypermood at Scott's revelation plummeted as he saw the unflattered look Scott gave him. So maybe not revel in the awesomeness of you being a werewolf yet. He quipped awkwardly. So what happened, man? You just jumped out your window and ran off to God knows where. Scott grimaced as he tried bringing up memories of the unpleasant night he just survived. Don't remember much, but what I remember is being pinned to the ground by Derek. Stiles interrupted. Derek? Like hail fire Derek Hale. Yes, Stiles. He's the one who bit me and turned me into this. All Scott wanted to do at this moment was take a dip in his tub for the next few hours. Okay. That's not morbid at all. So what happened after that? Did he teach you some werewolfy secrets like not ripping someone's throat off at the game or how to not turn into an animal every full moon? Hunters. There were hunters with bow and arrows who tried to kill us. Scott said in a very dead tone, as if he was describing the most useless experience in his life. Wait, hunters? Like Van Helsing? What? I've been reading up on a lot of things in the past few days. Stiles defended his prized knowledge at Scott's stare. So what now? Are you on the radar of some secret family that has a creed to slay every werewolf on Earth? Stiles asked in legitimate concern. I don't know, man. This shit is stressing me up real bad. God. Scott had another breakdown as finally started thinking of the implications of his new status. Hey, don't worry. I'll make sure we get through this, okay? I'll chain you up on every full moon myself and feed you live mice. Stiles nodded assuredly, but only earned a mix between flabbergasted and disbelief looks from Scott. I had a boa once. I could do it. Styles drove them both to Scott's house while brainstorming ways to help his friend live a semi-normal life and also ways to preserve his life. The lacrosse field had become their usual hangout spot after their daily classes for completely different reasons. Tristan because he wanted to observe the new beta and also maybe see if he could figure out who was the person keeping an eye on him. Malia because it was the only place she could relax and maybe enjoy the mildly violent game after going through the hell that was science class. While Allison was because her two friends just liked gathering there, and it was also a great spot for relaxation and requiring the energy needed to continue the rest of the day. While she animatedly engaged in conversation with Malia about the different players and whose play she found interesting, Tristan on the other hand was focused on the not-so-focused McCall who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. On the field. Scott and his best friend, Styles, arrived at the field a little later than usual due to Scott's unusually unmotivated, dull look concerning his favorite sport. Luckily, Styles had spent the better part of the morning trying to rouse his spirit, both the one to live and the one to play, and so far he's had no monumental success. They arrived just in time to hear their coach Finstock calling out the first warm-up takes for the day. Let's go. One-on-one from up top. He blew his whistle and fired the players up. Jackson, take a long stick today. The rest of you, keep moving your malignant asses on the field. Followed by an even fiercer whistle blow. Scott winced a bit, not from auditory sensory overload, but from how high-pitched the whistle was. Jackson grabbed the longer stick and positioned himself in front of the goalie as the sole defender while the rest of the players formed a straight line, each taking their turns and trying to get past Jackson and score a goal. Still gloomy? Come on, you gotta look at the bright side of things. Styles whispered exasperatedly as he stood behind Scott in the line, while the others before them got on with the exercise. Scott, hearing Styles' unmistakably and misguided optimism, twisted his neck sideways to give him a look that said really. Whether not understanding the look he was getting or simply deciding to ignore it, he started highlighting his point. For starters, you no longer suck at lacrosse. In his own opinionated reasoning, that was probably the biggest boon Scott McCall got from his freaky nature change, since the boy was weirdly against being a werewolf. Don't think I didn't notice that the bite injury has disappeared, which means you're probably got some sort of super healing. He continued pointing out the pros and undermining the few cons which, different from his motive, only served to increase Scott's depression. So don't worry, everything is going to work out just fine. Whistle. Move your butt, McCall. Coach Finstock's irritated shout snapped the two out of their hushed conversations. Yeah, go get him, Scott. Styles cheered and gave him an encouraging push forward. Scott struggled not to release a sigh as he could feel how eager Jackson was and the subtle dare in his eyes urging Scott to make his move against him. Giving himself a few pumps, he started out with a slow run as he scooped up the ball from the ground before increasing his sprint towards Jackson. Jackson, on seeing Scott's charge, broke off into his own sprint to meet him halfway, and with an expert dip of height, he braced Scott's momentum and overpowered it before pushing back and throwing Scott to the ground, his face etching in a triumphant smirk. A few people winced, including Styles whose face was uncertain, while others mostly laughed at his brutal takedown. You sure you still want to be first line, McCall? The lacrosse captain taunted. Seemingly out of it only to be brought back by Jackson's taunt, Scott didn't notice as he tried standing up when his coach had made his way towards him. My grandmother can move faster than that, and she's dead. He paused to let the words sink in first. You think you can move faster than the lifeless corpse of my dead grandmother? Scott's teeth clenched at the obvious mockery in his coach's words, which further stoked the frustration and anger he has been feeling since the previous night. Yes, coach. Not knowing and obviously not caring about Scott's special condition, which was currently causing Styles to pale in worry and realization, Coach further goaded him with mockery. I can't hear you. Yes, coach. Due to the swell of negative emotions currently rampaging through him, Scott's bestial transformation started taking over with his eyes turning gold. Then do it again. Scott picked himself until the ground and jogged back to his previous starting line, while his coach's imminent mockery loudly sounded in his ears, further ending him on. McCall's gonna do it again, McCall's gonna do it again. Jackson returned back to his previous location and prepared to foil Scott's second attempt to completely exert his superiority, while Scott finally regained a sense of clarity as the changes in his eyes receded, though for how long no one knew. Let's go. Coach blew his whistle for the go-ahead, which immediately kicked Scott into a full sprint. Feeling irked by the determined eyes at which Scott came at him, Jackson too pushed on, his mind already seeing the expected outcome, which was a repeat of his previous failure. Alas, reality was often disappointing. Scott rammed into Jackson with an intensity that flung him over his shoulders with an extra twist midair, hitting his shoulder and collarbone at the same time, which already predicted Jackson's outcome. The entire field exclaimed in worry as they saw how Jackson landed roughly on the ground and his pained grunt, which caused them to run towards him in concern. Scott, on the other hand, fell to his knees as the violent urges started influencing his senses, prompting a shift, even as he furtively tried to keep calm and failing at it. Ignoring the crowd's concern for Jackson, Styles, concerned for his friend, rushed towards him hoping he was fine after the hard collision, only to be faced with something else. "I can't control it, Styles. It's happening." Styles jerked back in alarm and questioned for clarification, hoping he, against all odds, had heard wrong. "Well, damn it. Come on, come on." Placing Scott's hand over his shoulders, he pulled the triggered werewolf up and limped them both back to the locker rooms where they could be out of sight in case he ended up fully shifting and bringing down the Furies. Back at the stands, the game caught the trio's attention, Tristan more than the other two, as he wondered what the hell Stilinski thought he was going to do with McCall. Malia leaned in and whispered into his ears as Allison was currently distracted by the foul play. "I caught a smell. Definitely a werewolf." She pointed towards another part of the field where a man with clean-cut beards wearing a black jacket and jean pants stood, his focus on the direction Scott and Styles went. "At this point, it's no longer our problem." "Why?" "The only reason why I even bothered keeping an eye out was for this reason. Since someone's keeping an eye out on him means he's less likely to go on a killing spree. Probably why there was no report of a mauled victim yesterday," Tristan said before packing his things and preparing to leave. "You guys are leaving?" Allison asked as she saw Tristan's movements. "I'm leaving." Tristan left the both of them with those words and entered the school building, having closed out whatever caution he had about the McCall boy. Regardless of the reason, Omegas were a cause for concern, as in certain supernatural circles, they were called the Cursed Ones. It was a general stigmatism that was the supernatural equivalent of racism, and irrespective of their moral bearings, stereotypes were something that was very hard to fight against, especially in a dangerous world like theirs. Having the assurance that he had someone looking out for him means that his actions reflected a higher power. Even animals of the wild had a hierarchy of order, and those who went against it were hunted down without pity. What no one knew, not even Malia, was that from the moment Scott McCall was identified as a beta, he was on a timer. There was no way he would let astray, had he been one, into the den he and Malia had inhabited. Had anyone been looking at Tristan at this moment, they would have been frightened for their life, as his normal brown eyes glowed blue, giving him a beastly appearance, not as wild as Scott's but just as dangerous. Three things cannot long be hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. It was not just a mantra, but also a way of life and a grim reminder that under their deceptively human facade, an iota of their true nature never changed. The only thing stopping them from reveling in their nature was not the fear of hunters, but a moral switch. And for someone like him who always had to keep it under, it was fully natural that his moral switch had a few misplaced screws. Yes, he was part of a werewolf pack. Yes, he imprinted on Malia, or rather Malia had the biggest impression on his life. Yes, he answered and obeyed his alpha, but that in no way changed what he was. While wolves relished the thrill of the hunt, he only gained the minimum modicum of satisfaction when his prey was dead. This is bothersome. The air around him changed, and he reverted back to his normal look, as if everything that had happened moments ago was a lie. They were called shapeshifters for a reason. His next class had McCall in it, while Malia and Allison had different classes. He only had a few classes with Malia, and even fewer with Allison, and he liked it just that way. He wasn't blind to the fact that Malia's dependence on him was what prevented her from wanting to know people. While he was absolutely okay with it, he'd rather have her spread her wings a little and try doing a few girl things with other females in school, which was why he had tolerated Allison's presence as much as he did. He pushed open the door to his next class, biology. It was not a subject he was very fond of. Malia Tate POV, I really do hate math. Malia was currently in a class filled with students like her, and each was currently seriously going through the materials in front of them, while at the same time listening to the teacher's incomprehensible ramblings. If only Allison was here, at least I wouldn't be that bored. And not to mention that stupid skank is also here. Malia idly thought while throwing a glance at Lydia's seat at the first row of the class, said girl also flipping through her books with a relaxed expression. Ms. Tate, since you have nothing else to do, How about solving a few questions for us? The teacher, who had been observing the girl for a while now, called for her since it was obvious she wasn't paying attention. No thanks. I think I'll pass. Malia replied genuinely, but that response seemed to throw the students and teacher into a loop. The teacher on his part was confused and embarrassed on how he should tell the girl that his question was only for polite reasons, and he wanted her to really solve some problems on the board. Oh, I see. At least you understand. He nodded and turned to focus on any student zoning out and not doing the exercise he gave them. Oh, I don't think I understand anything you wrote. And for the second time that day, Malia silenced the entire class.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.